So we're back,
right.
and it's another week that's just a little bit more crazy than the previous week was more crazy than the last. So, there's that. So we've been talking a little bit about voter integrity and racism, and so we're just going to kind of continue, because you folks deserve this conversation.
We had the pre-show with fucking Cuomo. So the Cuomo update is he's got another one.
Yeah, he is up to 10, but not 11. So he is at an even non-crime
another one.
Listen, in New York, sexual assault violations are like Pokemon. You gotta catch them all.
Oh, like STDs.
Oh, man.
Oh, wait, no, it's STIs now. Whatever.
What the fucking Goomba?
Indeed.
That mook.
Whatever is politically correct, you can call those diseases. I'm okay with that.
Right. Well, speaking of diseases...
I wouldn't want anybody to be offended that it's a disease instead of an infection.
Oh, and then we can briefly recap Spirit, and then we'll get immediately back to what Evan's been trying to start with.
What's he been trying to start with? I wasn't really paying
attention. The election law thing.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I just thought the Spirit thing it's very succinct, because it got rid of all the problem out of nowhere. And I didn't even see that until just now. That's hilarious.
I'm absolutely going to link that for everybody. Basically, what happened is a couple with their child was on a Spirit flight waiting to take off, and a bothersome flight attendant came over and was like, "Listen, you can't do this." Their child was eating, apparently, to give the full breadth of the story. Well, there's an adequate amount of testosterone there for it to be a fellow, so...
a jolly red-haired,
Well, the hair was probably...
But he's medium stature.
Oh, you mean the fellow? Yeah, the fellow that was with the child. I thought you were talking about the high testosterone individual that told them that was not acceptable.
No. The person who told them that, it was probably... I mean, I have a prediction that if we get to see this flight attendant, they will be a jolly fellow with blue hair.
And a svelte baritone.
A svelte baritone. Well, probably a jolly ma'am with a svelte baritone.
More accurate than you think, actually. More accurate than you think that explanation.
I'll have to interject before you get to the good part of the story, because there's something to point out about Spirit Airlines, which will immediately become reversed.
Well, the long and short is this kid's having a snack because this family is just trying to get their kid to...
fucking child and it wants a goddamn snack.
Yes, exactly that. So everybody's got their masks on. They're retarded, stupid masks that you don't actually need in a positive pressure environment, but whatever. They're wearing their masks like the good little people that they are. The child's having a snack, and then this high testosterone individual comes along and makes a real fuss, tells them they got to get off, and they do. So shortly thereafter,
baritone lass with big hair.
Ma'am.
Still accurate, still entirely accurate, actually. Yeah. So this baritone lass, she sends them off the plane. Everybody else gets
lass. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Svelty. We don't want these people thinking that it is a rough baritone. It is a svelty. It is a smooth baritone lass.
The only time they go chopping in the woods is if they're up in the PNW.
Oh my. Well, anyway, they throw them off the plane, and then the plane goes to reboard, and everyone reboards except for one person. Now, mind you, this was a family of 3.
The nice part.
But one person didn't reboard, so we'll go ahead and pause for a quick moment.
This was possibly the person who was svelty baritone and lass.
It's possible. So what's the story, Greg?
I heard about the reboarding. I saw someone, this is entirely within the character of Spirit Airlines, say they probably got charged for getting kicked off the airplane, too.
It's understandable. I mean, that would be...
what kind of opinion I had of Spirit Airlines before as well, because I was fucking dying on the floor laughing when I read that. Anyway.
But the actual story is everybody got back on, except for the flight attendant. So
rightfully left
sometimes
behind. What a
there's a little bit of justice in the world. Sometimes.
Well, this is one of those things where, as much as we've been pessimists because the world's gotten kind of nuts, the truth of the matter is people have a threshold. They will tolerate bullshit for a certain period of time, and then no more.
Which we have reached, by the by.
And I think that we're getting there.
Let's just remember that before any of this went down, these parents had a 2-year-old, which was eating without spreading. So they were probably a little bit distressed when some busybody came along and started pissing all over their parade of having a minor victory in their day.
Yeah,
and then they got to walk back on and have a minor victory of a fucking year.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I can only hope that at the very least, this high testosterone individual is able to get some sensitivity training. You should treat these people with greater respect.
We don't want to use the term able because that's ableist. So, encouraged with significant amounts of force.
And
prejudice.
And prejudice.
Actually, all the prejudices.
Well, I mean,
I hope they were screaming every ism in the book.
I mean, this was actually violence on a minority. If you really want to go all that far out, I mean, this was just a Jewish couple.
Minorities. I'm not letting that happen. Fuck that ageism shit.
Oh no! This was a Jewish family. You see,
given
this was actually quite anti-Semitic.
The actual falling rates of fertility, I think that's fair. I think that the children are a minority, and we should treat them.
Yeah, but not for very long.
Well, I don't know. We'll see how the vaccine rollout goes, right? But
It only takes one act of bigotry to ruin their whole life.
Yeah, but what if I have multiple bigotries I want to express at once?
Well, I mean,
Well, then, sir, perhaps I would recommend for you a job at American Airlines. Or Delta. You see...
Delta.
That's a good segue. That's a really good segue right into the voting law. You see, Georgia just recently put into place a new voter integrity law, which is literally voter integrity. As a matter of fact, it even expands voting access. Makes it a little bit easier for any given municipality or county to, make things easier to get into. You can get a free ID.
Get a Dropbox?
Yeah, they're able to have Dropboxes available.
I am really curious, though. How is the voter ID law going to pair up with all the rest of this?
What, you mean HR 1 or what?
No, how is voter ID going to pair up with mail-in voting? How are they going to pull that off?
Oh, they just have to provide a copy of it when they do the request. Not necessarily a copy. They can provide a copy. They can provide the last 4 of their social. They can provide some other thing, and they can provide the actual ID number.
Yeah. So in short, in order to get your mail-in ballot, you have to go to a physical office.
No.
Where somebody physically verifies.
Nope.
No. But you have to mail it in under
penalty of
perjury with your ID, so they know exactly who you are.
Yeah,
There's a handshake that occurs before an election in that case.
Yeah, okay. There is something to it. You don't have to actually go in, though.
Like absentee ballots in every other state.
Basically.
Not the mass mail-in bullshit, but actual absentee system where you have to tell them, hey, I want one.
Yeah, hey, I am me. I am at this address. Please send me the thing so that I can do the thing. And since that time, there's been roughly 200 companies that have come out in support of this. And if I'm being honest, it's an entirely racist agenda. Not the voter ID law, mind you. That has no basis in race, racism, Semitism, anti-Semitism, anti-white, pro-white. It has nothing to do with any of that, actually. It's just to ensure the integrity of the vote, to make sure that one vote is one vote.
Like preserving the integrity of a basic civic action.
Yeah, God forbid, to actually protect your extant human rights. In this case, a civil right more than a human right, but nonetheless, my point stands.
Well, the right of a country to have self-determination, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And as much as
transition between leaders, that'd be kind of cool too.
Yeah. I mean, it used to be that regicide was all the thing.
All this fucking dumbass doubt, right?
So once this happened, there's a number of things that occurred after this went through. We'll begin with the big one, which is MLB, Major League bullshit. They decided that they're going to move out of Atlanta, Atlanta being the home of Hank Aaron. You may have heard of him if you've ever heard of the bases ball. He was a bases ball player. And some people have heard of him, maybe. And they were going to have the All-Star game in Atlanta in honor of his memory. But they decided that instead of having it in Atlanta, where there's a large population of, not African Americans, because they're not actually immigrants from Africa, but blacks, because they're, Americans that happen to be black. They decided to move it from there to Colorado, where Colorado has this pesky voter ID law. Goodness gracious. You'd think they'd do a little bit of research before they try and, wave around there.
The key to being a professional hypocrite is to ensure that you don't actually pay attention to whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
They are really
surprised by their own incompetence.
Well, they really are knocking it out of the park. Wouldn't you say? Come on, I had to.
I'll give it to you. That was funny.
I won't. I won't. I'm sorry. Baseball is
Are you saying that was a foul, sir?
Barely a sport.
That one I'm not giving you.
Okay.
That's my limit.
But I mean, to put this simply, and to spell out my my argument on this whole thing in the easiest way of framing it, which it does have, its downfalls, but it's an easy framing in the way that these people are saying this is a racist thing. It basically speaks to the idiocy of these people. To call this racist is to call into question the intelligence and ability of any person of color. If you say that it is racist for someone to acquire an ID, then you're saying that any black person is not smart enough to acquire an ID, or even, in this case, to know so much as their last word of social.
Before you specify any race, you're implying some sort of disparity that is inherent.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this is one of those things where
there really isn't one.
Voter ID laws have been something that's been debated for a really, really, really long time. Ever since I remember being in high school, and I remember having this debate. And even though I considered myself progressive and liberal at the time, the truth of the matter is that the logic never underpinned. There was never any real logic that I could buy into that was like anti-voter ID. And the arguments that they would always make is this very vague one where they somehow know that the majority of there's a higher percentage of black people without a voter ID than there are white people, which will require what's that?
ID in general.
Well, I mean, either way, a voter acceptable ID, however you want to phrase it. But it always was very presumptive that they somehow had the data to know who had and did not have a voter ID, which the only way you'd actually be able to get that data is to, basically have voter IDs.
Or ask people.
Well, I mean, it works in the venerated European Union. Literally every country in the European Union has voter ID laws, but,
Canada has a fucking voter ID law.
Yeah, Canuckistan, even.
And the Canuckies are the ones the Toronto Canuckies have been shouting at the rafters about how racist it is. Because, of course.
Well, I mean, that is Toronto.
I've never, when you start talking about how often you have to whip out your ID, ignoring alcohol, right, which is pretty obvious when you need it. You need it when you sign up for any major service. Right,
ignoring 40s and ignoring Phillies.
Yep. You're going to need it, to drive, obviously. Mm-hmm. So in order to do this, you basically have to have people who aren't receiving any medical care, who aren't going to work, who aren't driving, who aren't buying any booze or any drugs.
I gotta point something out here shortly, though, that's going to make you foam at the mouth again.
I don't think so. I don't foam at the mouth.
Yeah, probably no more than normal.
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, lay it on us, big man.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, well, how many of those things are A, government services, and B, that are guaranteed by the Constitution?
I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
You make a valid point. What we need to do, we need to start mailing guns out to every citizen of legal age. You're absolutely right. I mean, the Second Amendment is very clear, so we should really just be mailing out a firearm to every American citizen.
I think actually that would be a good thing, though.
I mean, absolutely.
At the end of the day,
Fuck it, the felons too. Let them shoot themselves.
While you can make the argument that civil services do not technically require a government ID, functioning as a normal human being in this century, you do. So
I get that part. What I'm saying,
don't buy off on the poll tax argument.
Yeah, but that is irrelevant though. Because
realistically, nobody is so self-sufficient that they aren't interacting with other human beings.
Yeah, but there's a very big difference between say, having an ID so you can go to a fucking bookie, for example, or in the other states having an ID so you can go down to the liquor store, or having an ID so you can drive, which is explicitly not guaranteed in the Constitution, and they make damn well sure to nail that into your head, at least until you get your ID and you forget about it and then bitch later when you get a ticket. That you are not, that it is a privilege to drive on the road, not a right.
And I understand.
And voting is a right, not a privilege.
Oh, and just a quick addendum to that, as a matter of fact. You can drive your car on your property, and they can't do a damn thing about it.
That is actually something I brought up when someone was complaining about like the vaccine shit, and it's okay, buddy. If you need everything to be safe before you go outside, then get off the fucking road. And don't ever start your car again, because that is a non-zero risk that you will kill someone, including yourself. And you don't have to have a license to do that, because you can do it on your own property.
Yeah, you can drink and drive to your heart's content on your own property.
Again,
drive right in your house.
There's questions when it comes to the vaccines. It's about relative risk, right?
Yeah, so anyway,
I do not perceive COVID as a risk, and therefore I don't.
Without getting into the weeds on that yet again.
Come on, you brought it up. You decide to sit there and grandstand. I'm going to have to smack you down. It's okay.
What do you mean?
It's okay.
That was explicitly an argument you would have fucking said. Get off my ass.
No. I would have gone into risk and relative risks associated with the two things. And
that was my whole fucking point. That was the exact point I made.
But in any case, I just don't buy off on the. I don't buy off on the. Oh my God, this is a constitutional right versus a functional in society.
Yeah, but you see, that doesn't matter because when it comes to the law, it is an actual theoretical exercise, not just a pragmatic one.
I disagree.
It is necessarily so.
You still can't live within the United States without an ID, right? You just physically.
But they're not really
living,
to have some
and they're probably not voting.
I mean, they're alive.
Oh no, they're absolutely voting. We know who they voted for.
They're voting
as well.
in California, at least.
Okay, aside from those cases, but the point is they're not. Most of the homeless people are in a very unique class, and it's not a huge proportion of the population. What is the percent of people that are homeless?
At the end of this, the most important thing here is to get United States citizens A, more engaged, and B, to be secure in their vote. And achieving both of those things, or at least some modicum of a degree towards the goal, is done by giving an ID. Sure, everybody can be at least nominally sure that only other people with an ID voted. At least then you've narrowed down the problem to who doesn't have a real ID, who's cheating.
But again, and I want to put this into perspective.
And you can also know who else is going to vote prior to the election.
Homeless argument, that's about 1 in 1,000 people. And I'm sorry, but I'm not going to turn around and be like,
All right, what was the election won by?
How was it? It was less than 1%.
How much less than 1%?
That much.
How much less than 1%?
I'm trying to remember the exact number. I don't remember
How many people supposedly voted? About 160,000, right?
Well, maybe we should not get into the how many people voted versus how many people were.
160 million. 160 million. I've had a long day. Give me a fucking break here.
You're off by a factor of 1,000, so we're...
So, let's just say that it was 25,000... Let's give it 80,000 votes that it was lost by for Trump. Divide that by 160. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. another
you're
zero
using
for
that
the
racist
first
math
one.
now.
And multiply that by 100 so I can just directly tell you a number. And that is that is 5/500ths of a percent.
Well, that's an
If it was
inconvenient
80,000,
number.
calling the election by 80,000 votes, and I'm just ballparking here because I don't have the real fucking number.
It was 80 versus 75, right? So it's 155.
All right.
75.
And you wanted to sit there and
Don't you mean
find out
59?
I'm going with the official statistics here.
The quote-unquote
I think
official.
he's coming in with the other side to my ballparking here and using real numbers.
Yes, I am.
Well, real
I'm actually using it's roughly 3% is what the difference was between the two candidates.
So what's the 3% though? What's the actual
problem? The problem that you have with saying 3% is that it ignores
no. I didn't mean
between swing states and blah blah.
I didn't mean the gross difference. I meant the difference in the counties that determined the election.
And that's a separate thing. I don't know the
that's the value I was talking about, because in that case it was on the order of 50 to 100,000, I think it was, which is less than 1%.
Probably in there. It was probably around there.
That's less than 1%.
But even so,
now you're 1 in 1,000.
It's not shipping all of the homeless people in the entire nation.
I'm just saying that by your average metric, which is equally being cheesed here by me.
Yes, yes, it is. You're actually, I think you have a violation.
You dick, you brought it up. I'm going to pull that on you now.
No. I mean,
I am cashing that card in right now. Yes.
At the end of the day, while we can account for that, sitting there and talking about overall policy, we cannot sit there and plan policy for 99.9% of the population and go, oh my God, this is completely invalid because 0.1%
again
has an issue with it.
You should be able. Here's another statistic for you. Here's another unknown for you.
They can manage to gather enough cash up for their booth to haul. So I think that they can go.
Again, another unknown for you. How many people show up ready to vote, get told you don't have an ID, you can't. Try it, look at their watch, go, I can't go home and get my ID, I need to vote now before the poll closes, and they get told, sorry, you're SOL.
Well, I mean, poor planning.
I know, poor planning and all, I agree, fundamentally. It's voting day, you fucked up, you had weeks to do this. Yeah, I get that part.
You want me to be sympathetic to an individual who goes,
just
oh my God,
we'd also have to look at the numbers of how many of these quote-unquote real people.
All right, I got to go ahead and bring this back to you in a different way here, Steve. What happens if you show up to class and you're just like, yeah, but I need like an extra hour and I have this homework ready for you. It'll be done. And he just goes, sorry, Charlie.
Yeah, it sucks, but you live with it.
I'm just putting it out there that there's this an in-kind moment that you're overlooking the feeling of.
I'm not in any way overlooking an unkind moment. Like I have zero sympathy for people who fuck up that bad. Like this is something that voting day is a thing, and you know like at least for where we are. In my opinion, I believe the polls, ignoring the early voting. Let's say it was just same day voting. Our polls are open from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m.
So I should probably go ahead.
At some point in 14 hours, you should be able to find your license and go to the freaking poll.
I should go ahead and explain part of what's going on with our discussion here. This also explains a lot of our other arguing. This, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is called edge case analysis, where you go and you find out where the boundary is and you bitch about it until you've gotten the gray area squeezed down a little bit, and it kind of looks like a line from a distance.
It's also called pragmatism versus theory.
So again, the law, by necessity, because it's the theory that governs the way society works, no matter how you bitch about it in court, is necessarily theoretical when you're describing it in legislation. When it comes to court, this is the case.
Yeah, that's kind of what the judges and jury are supposed to be for.
When it comes to writing a law itself, you can never get to all the specifics.
I don't know. I think that if I was sitting there in the case of a judge presiding over the law, right? the first thing you have to do is find an individual who has standing in order to bring, evidence that there has been injury in that case.
And you know
right?
what the zero thing they do?
And when we start talking about these laws, these aren't actual individuals standing up and saying, "Oh my God, this law would never impact me."
Yeah, the
this
zero
is an activist in an activist organization saying, "Oh my God, a theoretical person."
Again, they're not relevant either because they're not the ones writing the law. So the point there is the zero thing a judge does is not write the law; they read it.
Sure, but the judge, in order to actually have a case, would have to have an individual who was injured and had standing. And this has actually been brought up a lot with a lot of recent cases.
Well,
So, for instance, the Obamacare cases or even the Trump trial cases. So in order to do this, the people who are opposed to this law, who want to sue on the grounds and get it overturned because it's unconstitutional or whatnot, would actually have to find the individual who gave a shit and didn't have an ID.
Yeah, I'm saying that's perfectly reasonable.
A tiny fraction of the population that they don't exist.
Yeah, I'm saying it's perfectly reasonable, but I'm also saying that if I was looking at this in a post-legislation, I would say that the person to have standing would be the one that was unduly burdened with the requirement to find some form of ID.
And all you'd
have to find
that person.
Yes, absolutely.
You'd have to find that person. And let's be entirely honest, they don't exist.
Suppose
they don't exist.
Was somehow unduly burdened, and that by Democrats' shitty luck, it would probably be an undocumented immigrant or an illegal alien. But let's just skip that eventuality too.
So again, the point is that by the time you get down to, like, the courts do, when you start talking about things like standing, you can't sue on theoretical grounds. You can't even overturn laws on theoretical grounds. Literally,
you
start talking
about that back a little bit because
we dealt with this with Obamacare. Literally, they were not able to sue over the individual mandate because the individual mandate wasn't implemented for 7 years after the law was passed.
Right.
So they literally just had to wait until the individual mandate kicked in, then sue, and then get the thing overturned.
And who do you think made that calculation?
Oh, I'm sure who made that calculation, but...
Yeah, you know who that guy is, right?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, that dickhead in court, the MIT guy?
Yeah. I mean, I get it.
Court in session, whatever.
I get it, but it goes back to the point, is that we routinely have these things where there's a theoretical case, and we know that we can pass the law without this.
So here's a question for you.
What you're hearing is activists who are arguing, not an actual reasonable person who has been...
Here's the thing that... Here's the part where theory and practical operation cross boundaries a bit. As soon as you get out of your... as soon as you get out of the first case you bring in, as soon as you get out of your lower court case, and I can never remember the fucking names of these things. I remember appellate. I don't remember the first one. And it's not prima facie because that's getting your ass arrested. Or a ticket. As soon as you get past that first case, you can immediately get lost in the weeds. And no, it's not that far off. When you...
But you'd still have to have that first case. And again...
Yeah, but again, you don't need it because this is the thing where it gets in. Here's the thing that gets in. You have, if it's unreasonable as a requirement for proof of that to get to an appellate court, that is something that you can challenge a court that there has been an undue burden placed upon you to prove standing. Not that gets significant rulings in favor of it.
That is literally why the election turned out the way the election turned out. Is we had a whole bunch of people who just said, nope, no standing.
Right. Yeah,
also, they said there was no standing after the fact as well.
Still going through right now as we speak, and you know why they're going through? Because they're proving if they had standing or not.
I'm pretty sure that they kicked them all out. Almost every. I don't think there's any more left.
There was shit that just dropped like a week or two ago. Did you not remember that?
What are you talking about?
What was it, in Pennsylvania they had something where they said that, it really was bad that they did that?
No, the Pennsylvania one was literally...
There was something that was decided just a week or two ago.
They picked it up at the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said it doesn't matter because...
No, that was... Not that. There was something that happened just a week or two ago, and I'm pretty sure we talked about it.
I don't think so.
No, I don't think we got into that.
Yeah. I think Florida's got some really
Maybe I'm
good,
misremembering.
No,
really
something
good
came up,
products coming in
but
there.
we haven't discussed it here.
Okay, we hadn't discussed it.
No.
All right, so something did come up.
You sure?
Well, Evan just remembered something came up. Now, again, this could easily be that it has no relevance to the point I'm making anyway. Point is, some of these cases are still ongoing, and they're moving through stages slowly enough. I mean, there's also here you can look at the tallies. Oops, all the votes are gone.
Yeah.
All the ballots disappeared because they had them shredded. That was a thing. You know, the thing was supposed to keep 2 years.
Ignoring the illegalities. The point is that you need to have standing.
That's going to court.
I mean, that stuff's going to happen, right? They're going to make anything that could potentially counteract the narrative disappear, right? Like, we were kind of hoping that there was some integrity in the process.
I mean things like blaming Biden biting people on the dogs.
I don't know your reference, but
I mean, he threw those poor dogs under the bus. Dogs deserve better. They're good doggos.
Going back in. Look on that dog's face. It's like, you Benedict Arnold, son of a bitch. You need to kill him.
Oh, I remember that. That was last week, wasn't it? There was some sort of
That was the second
Yeah,
time
they
Champ
said that Champ bit some sort of Secret Service agent. We will just take the trustworthy media at their word that that's how it went down.
Yeah, it's not because some squirrel got to Biden's ankle and he's gone full rabies.
Yeah, I mean, we couldn't say. These are all allegations based on, places like the New York Times. Speaking of the New York Times, there's a small update for people kind of in these spheres. Project Veritas has scored a big win there. The New York Times has basically had to say that basically they only publish opinion. They're not a factual, publication.
Although, to be fair, they've done this before. This is not the first time this has ever come out. Because I think Project Veritas sued somebody else over the fall, and they won. And that was an individual author.
This is only the seventh time, whatever the hell. I mean, they said it in the video. This is only they've someone who has come after the New York Times for the kind of shit that they're going after him for slander or whatever. They've had under 10 separate instances in court where this has actually been sustained as having the standing to go forward with the case, being so egregious and so direct that they had the standing.
And basically, they're still going forward even after that defense.
Yeah. So the New York Times is...
Discovery is going to be a motherfucker.
It's hilarious. It is going to be hilarious.
There are going to be New York Times journalists who have to be interviewed by members of Project Veritas under oath. That is solid gold.
So this is because I remember Project Veritas did this with or who was it? It was some author that published a piece, and somebody sat there and sued them for slander and libel. And she said that even though her piece wasn't labeled as opinion, it's really her personal opinion at the time.
Oh, no, she changed her story between what she said in the article and what she said in court testimony.
Oh yes, I remember that.
She started off by saying all, and then changed it to most of the things that Project Veritas was basing their story off of were unnamed sources.
Yep.
It went from all unnamed sources to mostly unnamed sources.
Yep. Except for the fact that I think they if I remember correctly, they actually had all of the sources named.
No, they not only had them named, they had their fucking faces on camera.
That's right.
I think if you wanted to, you could probably find their fucking address.
Well, I mean, so in this case, this is not a case where they've won something yet. They have just won the right to go to trial. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. They could still lose in court, but they have to go through discovery.
I mean, if they have
and they get to catch these people for perjury if they perjure themselves.
So first off, the what our audience would need to know is that when it comes to slander and libel laws, in our society, they are excruciatingly difficult to prove, to the point where it's not worth actually going for in most cases. Which means that in order for the judge to rule that this case can go forward, they have to have a whopper of evidence.
So a lot of states, thankfully, and this is a good thing in my opinion, have what are called anti-slap laws. And this is what they won in court just recently. Is New York Times tried to come in with an anti-slap defense. So slap is when you slander, libel, and whatever something or another, persecution or whatever. But basically, slap nuts with two P's is when you go after somebody for like libel or whatever, just to shut them up.
Yeah, it's basically to keep big corporations or big voices from shutting out the people that would complain about them.
It is a counter to the heckler's veto.
Certainly,
That's really
certainly
what it is.
It absolutely is. Yes, that's a really good, simple analogy.
Right. So
it says,
these people
it
doing
says
things like
very
that,
simply that you can't just turn around and say that person's lying, and then we're going to take you to court for that. You actually have to prove it in court that individual was lying.
Instead of getting dragged through the entire case, anti-slap kind of short circuits that down to, well, your case has no standing and you're a bitch. Goodbye.
Right.
So, the New York Times tried to pull that against Project Veritas, and the judge apparently thought that what New York Times did was so egregious that there was no fucking chance. And the anti-slap defense, if you will, was dismissed immediately. So that's what...
And that's a big deal.
Yeah, that's a very big deal.
That's only happened, again, under you can count the number of times it's happened, like in the last century, on both hands.
Yep. And so in order for that to have happened, the New York Times legitimately has to have done something. And not just done something, but done it intentionally. Like, so one of the things when it comes to slander, the difficulty and the burden of proof that anti-slap sits there and kind of deals with is you have to know that what you're lying about somebody with is a lie at the time that you're saying it.
Yeah.
So that's how it has to be done maliciously. So in order for them to move this forward, it means that New York Times, they literally have evidence saying that this is going to be what we're intentionally going to do, and we are going to lie and obfuscate in this case.
You know, and that very easily could have been. Here's the funny thing: is that could have easily been gathered in the same way that they had several months of CNN morning calls.
Yep.
You know, it could have easily been something that they hadn't even published yet that they were still working on. They just came in with evidence to report and said, "By the way, here we go."
Yes, indeed. But that is
party state.
It's but again, you know, like I said, right? We reach a point in our society where we say, okay, that's enough. You've had your crazy time. And part of me is sitting there and looking at, like, I thought the Dems were going to rein it in a little bit more, and they haven't been able to.
Not even made the attempt.
Well, I think that they did. I think that they did make the attempt, and they failed because
you give them an inch and they will take a mile. It doesn't matter what they say; it's what they do.
Right?
They never do restraint.
So we have, you know,
that's not true, Craig. They're actually really good at physical restraints, especially if we're talking about black people. But anyway.
Oh shit!
Wow.
That old KKK.
They said they were going to stop that in the 1860s, you asshole.
I know, wouldn't? Well, you know, you can't really expect them to.
And they fucked that up, apparently.
Yeah. Anyway, you were saying?
God. Oh no, just that I thought that they were going to sit there and rein it in a little bit, and I do believe that they tried, but I don't think they realized how. Like they kind of.
You see, they did try. They called it Juneteenth.
So we have, and for those of us who are engineers and we deal with reactions, right? We have an energy threshold and an energy barrier that you have to move a reaction up and over in order for it to start. Like gasoline doesn't spontaneously combust.
Something you might call an activation energy.
Activation energy. There you go.
For the high school chemists out there.
Well, sure. kinematics, it goes by a lot of different names depending on whether you're looking at it from a physics perspective or a chemistry perspective, but activation energy is a very good term for usage. So you have to raise the little ball up above this in order for it to go down the hill. And that's really what we're looking at. So the problem that they had is that Trump was moderate. And because he was moderate, they had to push that ball way up on that activation energy curve. And I think that
we'll call it Mount Crazy.
Right. They had to push it really, really far. And they got it to the top. And they thought that they could pull it back before it went all the way down the hill, and they just couldn't. So they pushed it too far up that activation energy curve, and they couldn't reset the bomb.
The only people who would believe what you're saying are the people who are actually trying to do that, and that would be like Nancy Pelosi and a handful of others. The rest of them are just fucking nuts.
Oh yeah, or at the very best, along for the ride. At best.
Well,
as far as the voters go, there's a lot of well-meaning Democrats out there.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of people who made a very bad decision. Well, there's about 59 million of them. But anyway, that made a really bad decision. And, you know, I would say that today there are less than 59 million people who would make that decision if given the option again today.
So there's a lot of, you could say there's even a silent majority of Democrats out there who really do or have like the best intentions in mind. You know, they might be voting for who their parents voted for, or who they, you know, just voting with the party because they don't like the other guy, whatever.
Or, you know, and
they're not the crazy ones. The crazy ones are the loud fuckers that are tearing the streets up and that are fucking up in Washington.
They're called bleeding hearts for a reason. So ultimately, when you start talking about the conservatives tend to be very much pragmatists. And the problem with pragmatism is it's not very empathetic.
Well, it's not comfortable, but it gets you shit done.
Right. Again, it doesn't. You're not necessarily going to feel good about the kids in cages, but it has to happen. It's a necessary evil kind of thing.
See, here's the thing: is when you look at just like last year alone, like one of the lowest years for illegal immigration as a country
in like the last few decades, kind of thing.
Yeah, in the last several decades. Yeah.
That happened because of tough talk, large deportation, and being bigger and scarier than you really are. And then when somebody decides to change that because they think the problem's been solved, it creates the problem all over.
Now, here's the funny thing: if you listen to
we're right back to ground zero.
If you listen to the sentiment of the people who are actually at the processing facilities, they're all pissed off. And why are they pissed off? Because they say they were told by
Joe Biden told us that we could come here.
Yep.
It said Joe Biden said we could get in.
Yep. Well, I mean,
they paid a fucking coyote to ass up middle of Mexico.
And that's because he was running on a pro-immigration platform.
That's the thing. It wasn't just pro-immigration. It was pro-illegal immigration.
Well, yes.
Because you could easily say that Trump ran on a far more pro-immigration platform. But
he most certainly did.
Yep.
He was absolutely pro-immigration, but just pro-legal.
Hated him for that. A lot of heady conservatives and the far right, because there's separate categories here, hated him for that because they didn't think we needed any more people.
I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not really conservative, and I'm certainly not far right, and I think that his stance on immigration was kind of stupid. I'd really personally like to see immigration curbed for about 10 years.
Conservative and far right are separate categories.
Yeah, and I'm like a libertine nationalist guy. There's so many people that feel
right. Like when we start talking about these things, and I think so Scott Adams, who I have a love-hate relationship with, every once in a while he has
cartoons, man.
I don't. Every once in a while he has an inspirational idea that he conveys. Every once in a while, right? Every once in a while, and then the rest of it is him sitting there and smoking his own ass. Like he
rolls his hairs up and lights it up.
He does. He like puts his head between his legs and takes a big whiff of his own asshole. And it is. I'm not trying to disparage.
Man, he was an engineer for years, and then he decided to stop that and write cartoons. Therefore, he knows his best.
He was an economist. At least he's STEM adjacent. He's not STEM.
Economy is not a science. Sorry.
But the point, one of the things that he did in one of his little video things that he did back in 2019 was he talked about how people, like, in order to be coherent on the immigration debate, and this was back when Trump was dealing with this problem, they need to be able to cite the number of immigrants that can come into the country every year, legally.
Sure.
Right? Like, you need to be able to say, this is how many people I find acceptable, this is how many people I don't, because if your answer is 0, then you're just being, kind of a bigot.
A pedant.
And if your answer is infinite, then you're a fucking moron.
Here's the thing. I wouldn't say that that's being. I wouldn't say that's being a bigot. I would say at the most charitable, that's being a pedant.
Sure, whatever. But
you don't have to be bigoted to say we're good enough.
I guess that's true.
There are people out there who are just a dick.
To put it now, where Craig and I think Craig will back me up on this. I'm speaking for you before I've had the opportunity to against the idea, but I'm pretty sure you'll agree with me. Is that's bullshit. You should never have a number that you sit there and assign as what's good enough. You should have a method to calculate the number for what is considered good enough. Because it doesn't matter, if those variables change, you should have something that allows you to change those variables.
Here's the thing. I would say if you want to have a number, you should have a method.
Sure, fine.
If you want to have a ballpark number, you should have a method. If you don't want to have a number, then you can fuck off.
You shouldn't be glued to a number. You should be glued to a method.
Sure.
Right? Would that be a fair? And this is not true just for like immigration. This is true for everything. And that's where again, Scott Adams' point was that to be coherent, you have to actually be willing to talk about this and have some sort of rational basis. Where he's wrong is how you get there. Because if you pull a number out of your ass, it could be too large or too big.
Well, this is actually something that comes up when you're doing safety factors quite often. As people talk about like, oh well, a safety factor should always be like greater than 2. No, in fact, a lot of things that are only like a couple percent above 1.
It all depends on what you're doing.
Exactly, and you have to have a method for that, which is not
for
not
bridges,
a number.
For bridges, it's like 4.
Right.
Just as an FYI, and then for other things, he's right. It's closer to like 1 or 2%, and that's just because like it doesn't create an inherently dangerous situation if you're off by a little bit, right? Like if you're off by 1% of the total number of pizzas that you ordered, yeah, maybe not everybody's going to get their second and third slice, but everybody's still going to get a slice. So it's okay,
but, if you had a safety factor of 4 for pizzas,
it would be very bad.
Fucked out of 300%.
Right. So there is a gradient here. But the point I was going to get to is that when we start talking about where Evan's coming in and he's saying that he doesn't think it should be a pro-immigration platform, or where people coming from the Trump side is, we can actually come up with and calculate, and we'll do this here on the show live because I've been prepping this one. It's been sitting in my lap.
He's been sitting there with his asshole itching. And he gets this argument.
For like 2 weeks. I haven't had a thought to actually expel it.
You got a fucking Excel file and a preamble and Word open, don't you?
No, I don't. You don't even need an Excel file. You can do it right off the top of your head, right?
Uh-oh.
So the first question, yeah. So the first question that you're going to ask is what would be so we'll talk about the most negative impact from immigration. I think that we can all agree it would be unemployment numbers, right? Because it's a 1-for-1 trade for jobs. Would we all agree on that?
I'm sorry.
You've actually got other concerns as well, so it all depends on the numbers. Cultural dilution as well as an issue.
A 1-to-1 trade for jobs.
So the factor that we need to control for the negative impact of immigration would be unemployment, right?
Okay.
That's the one that we're going to base our numbers on.
So every job lost for an American that is gained by a migrant of any sort is a net loss. That's what you're saying. Essentially. So
okay,
and so not every immigrant that comes in, every job that is taken by an immigrant is one that is lost by an American.
It's one that's not necessarily lost, but not available.
Not available is fine, sure.
Right. So if let's say the next question that you have is what would you find to be acceptable on a social policy level, maximum unemployment rate as a result of immigration? And my answer would be about 1%. I think that's the maximum that you could have as acceptable from immigrant losses for jobs.
There's a difference between present unemployment and the unemployment due to immigration.
That would be correct, yes. So, like, you know, if
present unemployment of Americans, let me say that.
Right. So, a maximum increase of unemployment of 1%. Now, let's start factoring in something like naturalization. It probably takes about a decade to naturalize an individual where they're no longer technically an immigrant and aren't really competing on that kind of a job, right? They've established themselves, they got friends, they got family. We would consider them American citizens in all but name only if they hadn't gotten through the citizenship process.
Okay.
And the citizenship process takes about 7 years, which gives 3 years to establish themselves, 7 years to go through the process, and be kind of taken out of this pool of immigrants. So, 1% unemployment rate, 10 years, that means that the maximum amount that we can have competing with the job market is a 0.1% influx of immigrants every year. Now, if you take, we got what, 360 million Americans?
Hold on a second, did I miss something there? You said a 1% increase in unemployment, right?
Yep.
And then we got the 0.1%. What happened?
So it takes 10 years between the period of time at which somebody arrives and they are technically in.
Right. So you have to assume constant employment for that to be the case.
Not necessarily. I'll get to that. How we factor that in, but just in general, a 1% hit to the employment rate. 10 years.
If I were being a college professor for a moment here, instead of trying to solve a problem, it should tell you what you think. I'm thinking about college professors these days. That to simplify the problem for basic understanding, we would just assume constant employment. But since we're not doing that,
whatever, it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
The overall numbers, so that means that we can have a 0.1% job for job competition in the market, right? Every year, on average, we can allow in 0.1% of the unemployed, or 0.1% of our working population.
Of our total jobs available.
Our total jobs available, right?
So jobs filled plus jobs unfilled.
Right. So if you turn around and we assume 360 million Americans, all right, what is it, 320? I think it's 320.
Yeah, it's about 320.
Yeah, so 320 million Americans.
Sure.
Assume 40 years of job life expectancy, right? That's 20 to 65 plus or minus years of unemployment, blah, blah, blah. So we have 40 years of employment, 320 million people. That's roughly 8-ish million people per job slot, right?
I mean, you have to include all the children.
Let me rephrase that. It's 80. Sorry, I jumped the shark there. There's 80 million, a lifespan of 1 to 80 years, of which 40 of those years are productive labor.
Okay.
Right? The rest of it is feeding off the system. Friggin', we need to grind them up into Soylent Green. But
okay, shut up, Crumler.
No, that's only the Jews that need to go into the Soylent Green.
He's coming along and clipping the copper wires out of the air.
We're only quoting Andrew Cuomo here, and just his own thoughts. These are certainly not any of our own.
Yes, these are my psychic thoughts. Well, I mean, then I'd have to go sit there and grind up.
If he were a Jew, he'd walk into the copper wires, allowing the Hasidic to be outside, and he'd make copper foil. Instead, he's cutting them off like a goddamn Italian.
I have no idea what you're referencing, but
hilarious jokes, which you'll get someday.
Okay, as I move deeper into Jewish traditions, according to my wife.
No, all right. You never heard what happens if you just pick up a knife?
No.
Copper wire. And then I had my corollary. What happens when a third Jew walks into it? Copper foil.
I see. Okay. Don't get it, but that's all right. It's not
the copper wire I'm talking about outside, by the way, is the one that the Hasidics put up around their yard so they can go outside and still be considered inside their home.
I thought that was silver wire.
Or whatever it is. It's wire.
Is that a real thing?
Yeah, it's a real thing. They put up wire.
Yeah, I thought it was silver. No, whatever.
It doesn't matter. It's the important part.
So in any case, going back to the example, divide 320 by 80 for the number of life years. That brings us down to 4 million people per life year. 40 years. That's 160 million people that are technically employed. 0.1% of that is 1 in 1,000, or roughly what, 160,000, something like that. I think that's where
that sounds oddly familiar.
Oddly.
Go on.
Wait, hold on.
That sounds like a mistake that was made earlier.
It might be, because I actually it drops down lower than that, and I got to remember where I got the rest of the calc from. But it comes down to be.
Well, then you have unemployed people, and then you have
no.
difference in employment.
That's separate. That comes into the whole entire thing there. So we get to, I think it's
So it's not 160,000.
No, it's not 160,000.
It's even lower than 160,000. And I'll just go ahead and say right now, a lot of people, when they do polling on this, would accept something on the order of 300-something thousand.
But it's
or up to 1 million.
I think it's 160,000, and then you have to sit there and baseline that for like the average unemployment rate, with it maybe hitting that maximum point, a 0% unemployment theoretically, right? And then going down to 0 at, say, 5% unemployment, because at that point it would be untenable to have. And that's how you'd have to balance it. But if you do something like that with an exponential curve, it drops down to something like 18,000 people. It's ridiculous how small that number becomes very, very quickly in terms of what would be tolerable for an immigrant population.
So this still sounds like it assumes certain static values that are not static.
I mean,
and that's perfectly fine, because those are the assumptions that you were stated at the very beginning here.
Right. Yes and no. There are certain static values that are not
obviously not the one I harped on early on, but like for instance, no population growth.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Not including the immigrant population into the population growth. If you do include population growth.
No. I mean, like, yes, at any given time, the base rate for any given 10-year period in which there is no significant increase, there's never going to be a significant increase in population growth. It works out to something along those lines.
Right. So it would be bigger than 18,000, but realistically, not by a whole lot over a 10-year period.
Not by a whole lot. And there was another thing that dropped it down significantly, and I believe that was when I placed it on the exponential curve. Mm-hmm. So the amount that we would have at 0% would be that full 160,000 rate, but you wouldn't want to exceed that 1%, so your threshold would be much lower at the average unemployment rate the nation have. So it would be like
now,
it's like a...
This assumes right now, and we're talking about the immigrants who come in and get a job.
Yep.
So this is specifically not including the immigrants who come in and don't get a job.
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, and that's, I mean, we're assuming the equal number of people here. How much? Like, we're going to assume that is including them as part of the potential for unemployment.
Yeah.
Right? So we don't want to have too many people unemployed.
Well, see, that's the thing is so for unemployment here, we're using the U3 index, I'm assuming. The standard for unemployment in the country that we use is the U3.
Yeah.
So U6 would be everybody who's not employed. And that's what's oftentimes called the true unemployment. But like, if you're, are you looking for work? Are you not looking for work? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are all things that are built into these different metrics. But U6 would be the broadest one. U3 is what you see normally when they talk about unemployment. U1 is like, that's it.
Lost you for a second there. U1 was what?
It's people like who are hired and fired, and that's it. No one else. So not looking for work, not people who are looking for work but can't find it. Not people who are, and I think there's like after a year or something is one of the differences. There's people who are like dejected and no longer looking for work because they're discouraged. So there's the discouraged unemployment section, and then U6 is like everybody who can work who's not working. And that oftentimes swings between like 10 and 20%, which is a large number, but like it's a realistic thing. So, it's not going to include all the children in the United States, for example, unless they're eligible for working.
Whatever number we commonly report. The point is that yes, there are. This is one of the other problems with these simplistic models is that there's a whole bunch of assumptions in the actual target baseline.
But again, it's one of the things that is often a frustration with people who hear about these kind of assumptions, these models, and these back-of-the-envelope calculations is oftentimes these kind of numbers that you come up with, especially like in engineering and just in STEM in general, these are the places where you start from. You say, okay, here's my extraordinarily shitty perspective and view of the world. How do we refine this so that it somehow matches reality? And I mean, in this case, again, we're still talking about speculation as to how many would be acceptable and what kind of method would you use to determine what is the acceptable rate of immigration.
Yeah, but when you talk about those kind of numbers, there's almost nobody that's going to be terribly upset about something like that.
Kind of
we can at least put a minimum bound on it, but also say, like, it's probably not terribly greater than this value with the other assumptions still in place if we add in, a little bit of real-world spice. It's probably not going to be, several orders of magnitude greater. It might be, say, an order of magnitude greater.
And I mean, there's other assumptions here because that would be distributed amongst, each nation state kind of thing. That's not just going to be what we can. That's not what we can accept from the southern border. That's what we can accept in total for the entire United States. That includes the people that are coming in that have rare skills that we really desire. That includes the people who are coming in with, no.
It's a very coarse model.
Right. It's a very coarse model, and I there's some other factor that I forgot, but it
well, here's another thing to consider is that if you look at about 40-odd% of the people who are here illegally just overstayed their visa. They're just here. That's just the way it is. So these are people who might already have jobs that other people wanted to have, who are no longer eligible to have them. And then, they might get fired and they just become part of unemployment.
Right, and if you did something like you break it down,
but they might not be included in certain metrics is the other thing.
So for people looking to understand how we get down to these lower numbers, if you take the 160,000 that we come in as total immigrants coming in, right, and you decided that you wanted to throttle it and do something like that, such that you had control. And you said, okay, that means 16,000 per % of unemployment you have as kind of max. So at 5% at zero, all of a sudden, if we're sitting in like 3 or 4 % unemployment, you're not getting very many. And that again, this is everybody coming in total. This is the people who are coming in from Europe. These are the people who are going to be coming in from Africa. These are going to be our Syrian refugees. These are going to be. It's a very, very small number per % of unemployment.
Now here's the major criticism I could give you right off the top of my head. And again, this is all in the same kind of ballpark, and this is obviously is built in as part of the assumptions. Every job, and so this is going to be contrary to an assumption on its face. Every job that is taken by an immigrant who comes in is one that is unavailable to an American.
Sure.
So then you have people who come in, and this is part of that highly valued skills class, I would say, because it is equally valuable to have someone with entrepreneurial inclinations. You have people who come in and are job creators. They come in, start a business, employ whoever the hell will fill the slot, and get shit done.
That's true.
That used to be a lot more prevalent among immigrants than it is now. It's far less prevalent now.
There's another key to that is, again, that's not coming in year one. Like, if you're talking about people who have that kind of cash to start up a business, which is about $150,000 to $200,000.
Well, here's the thing is,
right, if you have that cash...
Businesses can start, though. Consider where businesses can start. You don't necessarily need to have... You don't need a lot of cash. Look, you need $130 a year, roughly, to own a business, period. To have an LLC registered somewhere.
Yes and no, but to be at the point where you're hiring people outside of yourself, you need to have you're going to have typically the average cost is going to be $150,000 to $200,000 startup, sometimes more, and that's before you get to the point where you have employees.
So this is the part where I bring in lemonade stands. Like, I'm not saying they're running a lemonade stand, but my point is that there's some under-the-table stuff that often goes on.
There is, but again...
And that often turns into a legitimate enterprise.
Sure. And all of that is true, but that's not going to happen year one. right? And that's probably...
Well, we're talking about 10 years. You're talking about over 10 years
and
they have the time to do this.
At 10 years, and again, we're only focusing on unemployment rate. Yes, you're correct. At some point in 10 years, they become a net contributor, and that's why I put the cap at 10 years.
But again,
right?
I'm attacking here specifically an assumption that was stated at the very beginning.
Right.
So this isn't invalidating the model with its assumptions. I'm saying this assumption fails in this regard because these people exist.
And even then, when we start talking about those the formation of businesses, it's still only on the order of like 5 to 10%, right? So it doesn't, it wouldn't drastically swing it. So if you're talking about you're saying at the maximum, if we had 0% unemployment, we want that full 160,000 number coming in, and if we're at like 3% unemployment, we want at most 32,000 coming in, which is probably closer to the average, or maybe we're at an exponential curve.
That's inverted. So if you wanted to do it in that way, then you had to have a maximum unemployment that's allowable to have any immigration period.
Yeah, that's what I did. That was stated as the assumption from 0 to 5.
Okay.
So at 5% or more unemployment, nobody comes into the country.
So that would mean you'd have to have as your basis, if you did a per percent unemployment, you'd have a basis instead of on the order of 16, it would be on the order of 32,000.
That would be the average. Yeah, it would be on the average of 32. But 16. So when I sat there and I spit out 16, I'm talking about the lower end of what we're looking at.
Yeah, I get it now.
A common lower figure, because we're not going to want that full 1% of unemployment hitting, because unless you're at like, for whatever reason, amazing emergent technology has happened, and we need to
employ. For people who didn't catch that, it's if you talk about a maximum of 1%. The midpoint is a 0.5% of increase in unemployment, which would mean 16,000 instead of the full 32,000. So when he talks about 16, it's it is again is rough because it's not a linear curve that we're dealing with.
Right. You could
around
break
16
down into groups of like 20% of that. Of that, 4 to 5 or whatever, but in my base assumption is that we would curve it on an exponential curve, because as we get closer to that 0% unemployment rate, we really want to be
at 3%
pulling that up.
So it wouldn't be a value per percent increase. It would be just on an exponential curve.
You could do it either way, right? I'm spitting out numbers, but they're all kind of in the same ballpark. Whether we say, hey, at 3%, which is our average, we have half this number, and it's going to be a perfectly linear curve. That's one thing, right? If we say that we want that curve to be much more exponential, that's going to be another. But still, at the end of the day, it's a maximum of 160,000 people, and that's only going to happen when the economy is like perfect, and there is 0% unemployment. It's basically never going to happen. And on average, the rest of it is going to be somewhere on the order of 16 to 32,000 for most of our typical years. And that's actually, oddly enough, I think that's what we technically have set as the actual value of immigrants per year.
Now, here's the thing. So we have, I believe it's 60,000 immigrants per year that get allowed in by the lottery system, which is not they're separate. So 60,000 is basically the basis for the lottery system, and then there is normal immigration on top of that, and then you have chain immigration, which is another separate category, which is unbounded. Specifically, is unbounded,
and
because anybody who's a citizen,
families and blah 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 blah.
No, that's the thing, is anybody who's a citizen has the right to, which means that every 5 to 7 years is basically the period that you have to get your not your green card, but to get your citizen.
Yep.
So not just to get allowed to be a permanent resident alien, but to become a citizen of the United States is 7 years.
And oddly enough, it was funny because I just heard the
so that every time you do that, every time you come in, family members, you can sponsor everybody in your immediate family.
Right. So the United, without the point of the exercise, right? And I think that we've been talking about the numbers and debating about the idiosyncrasies because we do that because we're engineers, and that's like, this is what gets us off, people. It's so sad. We're pathetic.
Yeah, he's got his dick in his hand.
You know what? My dick was in my hand. My wife would be shaking her head and just like rolling her eyes because at least she wouldn't have to worry about it tonight. But the point of the matter is that when we start talking about it, this would be, when we start throwing out numbers like 16 to 32,000, this is derived from a methodology that has no assumptions built in as to what the right number is. This is entirely based off of agreeable points of principle, and then calculating that through with the numbers that we have and everything else. And yeah, we can fiddle with some of those assumptions, but it doesn't change those numbers drastically.
Well, here's the thing: is we can change those numbers drastically by changing a method and whatnot. But you'll notice that when I specifically start, just, again, not attacking him, but I was attacking what he was the statements, the method. You notice that the methodology, not in the number. It wasn't like an emotional attachment to a number because, I want things you may have considered or not considered in the method that you used.
And all of those things, even when we started talking about that, whatever assumptions we want to build into those changes in the initial problem statement or the layout or the formulation doesn't significantly impact the downstream numbers all that much. You're not going to be looking at going from, hey, it's going to be 16 to 32,000 people on average per year, and then going to 1 million or 2 million or 3 million. That's not how we're going to, like.
Or you have to have change the method to get there. Right.
And I mean, like, you would.
A big discussion.
Right, and these are the kinds of things that you come in, and it's not. This isn't us sitting there and saying we don't like brown people or anything like that. It turns out that it's a really small number if we want to preserve economic prosperity for everybody.
So that's the funny thing is a lot of. So when you say brown people, you have to start talking about which places you're going to be considering people to be brown.
That gets very complicated very fast.
Whether they're not brown or to what preponderance, etc. And talking to somebody who shouts racist at you about these things, their entire ideology falls apart and they call you racist again anyway. Because they have no specifics. They just say, well, everybody's, all immigrants are brown. It's like, okay, well, they came in from fucking Iceland, and they weren't a black person in Iceland at the time that they came in. What are you going to call them? Because are they still brown people? What if, most of the people who overstay their visas are highly productive, very well off by the time they get to the point where they make that kind of oopsie? People who are usually from India, Japan, China. Mm-hmm. So a lot of them are going to be Asians, or they're going to be Europeans. They're not usually going to be people who are from Mexico. That's just the way the demographics work out. But a lot of them are brown people too. So, it's anti-brown to say we don't want these highly productive people in the country because they overstayed a visa.
The point of the exercise is that the number of people that we would generally find acceptable based on completely objective metrics is not particularly high. And it has nothing to do with being a nationalist or not being a nationalist. It's just not particularly high.
And the numbers you're saying sound pretty reasonable to me. But I know that they're nowhere near the numbers that we see.
Here's where we can start to bring in other exterior critiques of the model that was brought up earlier. And this is not to find a model that works here, but just as a way to rein in here the theoretical exercise with the practical results of it. If you look at how the country has fared under relatively heavy immigration in the last couple decades, the last few decades really, if you look at the way unemployment has fared, the external factors beyond immigration have largely been the drivers of the rates of the significance in the rates of change for unemployment. So, for instance, last year, obvious short-term one was the pandemic, etc. But that was kind of severe. But if you look even further back, you have in 2012 we had Barack Obama getting in. Right after we had with 2008 for 4 years. And by the time it got to Trump took over and things were going great. And you can sit there and bicker back and forth as to who was the one who really did things for the economy, but in the end, it was the economy that was functioning the way it does and really didn't have a whole lot to do with the presidents beyond the policies they signed instead of the rhetoric they used. And it happens over multiple presidencies worth of time, multiple 4-year periods before you get a full result of whatever changes have been made.
Well, I kind of disagree with that because when you start looking at like immigration, there was this massive push to like try to prove that Trump can't handle the border or whatever back in 2018.
Well, yeah, but so he had an effect on immigration more than he had an effect on the economy because of immigration.
But even then, right, that effect on the economy did.
That was largely driven by other policy. Was kind of the point. Is that the sensitivity to immigration for the unemployment value is not as significant as the. And again, that has been graded, like not in terms of like school grades, but graded as in metrics on an exponential curve. So the exponent might need to be tweaked a little bit.
All of those things are fine criticisms.
Just as a point to where the extreme between the initial first principles model and where the application is coming in, just to bound it from both ends. The practical side of things says that we were able to absorb ridiculous amounts of people over time and not have the unemployment vary as sensitively to that as it was sensitive to other economic factors.
And all of that's true, and all of those kinds of we could investigate what those numbers are, whether it's really a 1-to-1 or something like that. Those are all true. But the other problems that you have is that jobs aren't static; they are dynamic. Yep. So if there's fewer people to hire, then wages go up, which is. Now
we also, for instance, didn't include something that's very significant over in California, which is migrant workers, people who are actually paid very, very, very well, by the way. So these are not illegal immigrants; these are people who come across the border seasonally to do things like harvest a crop. And they'll show up for like 6 to 8 weeks, make a boatload of money, like $25, $30 an hour, get their ass back across the border, and that'll be all the money that their family needs for a whole ass year.
Yep. And they work hard.
Yeah, they're very fucking hard workers. But they don't need to be there for the entire time that they're growing the crop, but once the crop needs harvesting, they need hands, because they only have like a few weeks to harvest things before stuff's done.
And so one of the other points about this is, and I'm going to move into one of the other topics that has kind of should come up in the last couple of weeks that we didn't really cover last week, is in comparison to immigration, which we can come up with first principle models and develop numbers and have discussions about what the assumptions built into these numbers are and whether this applies or that applies. This becomes very difficult when you start applying these kinds of approaches to other social problems, like the concept of reparations, right? Like, how do we calculate that problem? Because what you're going to have is there is no way to physically calculate those numbers.
Well, I mean, then you're running into the things of... Well, you run into some really bad problems of blood debts there. You've got the people that died to fix this problem. I mean, are they to be repaid for what they're owed?
That's something that's not typically brought up now, is it?
I mean, what about my family? My people, people in my family died to free these people and to free the South from the Southern rule. Yeah. I mean, will we be repaid for our blood debt?
Yeah, but Kendi says that you still benefit from being the person who descended from people who did that.
The better question when it comes to calculating these values is what is an appropriate wage for a group of people that, for all intents and purposes, first off, and I'm not talking about like they would have spent it, but fortunes have come and gone in the periods of time since slavery occurred.
Right.
Like, many families were rich and are no longer rich, and many families have been made rich since then. So arguing that somehow there's this debt that's owed doesn't even make sense because we're so far removed from it.
Well, so here's what I see from...
Should we calculate it as a baseline of differentials in America in overall wealth, or should we calculate it as a differential between the Africans who remained in Africa and African Americans? And that's going to not produce the positive result for you.
Yeah, not a very positive one at all.
Because you could probably say that Benin was far more responsible for slavery than any of the people who came by and bought slaves from Benin. But that's a separate thing entirely. So what I've seen as a cogent argument that wasn't just based on emotion and anger
there is.
for reparations is that the United States government made a promise and broke it and owed a debt. And I can say, okay, I can see that.
What was the promise and the debt?
To say that there's a presumptive situation where a promise was made and then broken.
But what was the promise that was made?
Reparations. When
was that promise made?
When they freed slaves.
I don't remember them making that promise. I don't remember that being...
Again, presume that the 40 acres and a mule thing was made and somehow broken. Like something
the
on that
Homestead
order.
Act is still in place. Like, you can still technically grab your 40 acres.
Yeah, if you were a slave.
No, I mean, you can still grab it today. Like, the Homestead Act has not been retired.
Again, let's just presume that somehow there's a promise that was made, because that's not the only thing that's brought up. Let's just moving past that. There's a promise that was made that was then broken, but it wasn't directly to you. That's where people start. That's where there's a lot of discussion to have. That's where I think that things break down. So if you look at reparations, let's go with the Japanese internment camps. Reparations were made directly to people who were affected.
Yes, and that is something
Germany
that is perfectly fair.
Look at Germany and Europe and Jews, which were two separate categories that were affected. Well, three separate categories actually that were affected by the Nazi establishment. Direct reparations were made, and no further reparations are possible. So I can't show up there and say a family tree were killed at Dachau and Auschwitz, and then demand reparations from the German government. I'm sure there would be a lot of sympathetic retards over there who would say, oh, but let's hear them out in court, and then I would go through the court motions and lose. But the point stands that direct reparations have been made, and no indirect reparations were made in that sense. There have been some campaigns for them, but they usually fail. And then they definitely fail in the practical implementation.
And there is a legitimate argument in my mind of sitting there and paying reparations just to make the problem go away and be like, we're done.
Right.
No more.
That's where a lot of the times
you can't play the race card. You can't play the racism card. The whole entire thing. Like, we're done. You're over.
That's where the indirect reparations have done their thing, and the problem is that the problem never goes away, and that's why you end up going through maybe one or two iterations where they just get stonewalled and they say no more. So,
and the problem
in that sense, there are people who can document it in a documented fashion, prove their lineage back to people who were slaves in the United States.
But even then, what is the actual value that you're going to place on that? Because at the end of the day, assuming that they weren't on the plantations, you'd still have them competing directly with the other people of the time.
Well, this goes back
to lowest common denominator wage. I mean, you'd sit there and go allow the white people to go back and say, okay, well, how wealthy is the average population here from this?
Without going into those weeds just yet. If we're talking about how to define a methodology towards arriving at a number, this is the concrete group of people that you definitely know were promised something, and again, by presumptions, this is an assumption here, by presumption what they were promised, and generations later can trace back their ancestry to these people who were promised something and denied.
And
that is a definable value. That is a definable quantity of people. That's the assumption that's being derived here.
Now, and to be fair, I don't believe 40 acres and a mule was a reparations thing from the United States government.
Right.
That was part of the Homestead Act, which, like I said before, is still technically in play. If you want to go out into the Midwest, you can technically petition under the Homestead Act for a mule and 40 acres. But you have to actually work the land.
So that is usually euphemistically used to encompass a wider set of promises that were made that includes reparations that were promised on a state level as compelled by the what the hell is it called? Reconstruction period.
The Reconstruction period still... I'm pretty sure that reparations were never part of any actual agreement that was entered into or contract with states.
Not necessarily the United States government. But state governments do.
I don't even think the state governments did. Right,
So,
because
again,
at the end of the day, the South wasn't really a big fan of what happened.
no, they weren't, but they were also big fans of getting Abraham Lincoln's pet project to stop crushing them.
I suppose.
So the state governments under Republican leadership would capitulate as that became a growing phenomenon until towards the end of the fucking 19th.
And maybe if you could prove all of that and go back and actually air it out in the courts and everything else,
Sure.
that would be fine. But,
so again, by presumption here, a built-up assumption set. By this presumption, there is a definable quantity of people that are eligible for some sort of reparations. So there is a way to define a class and category of people.
Sure, there
Not
is.
necessarily one that encompasses everyone, but there's a way to at least say, okay, we can hit, let's just call it 80%, 90% of these people who are theoretically impacted. We can,
and that's possible, but I don't think the claim has to do with a specific contract that was struck by a specific.
So here's where it gets interesting for me.
I haven't heard anybody make that argument. I've heard black people are owed reparations for slavery as a general asset class.
So this
kind
is
of
where it gets interesting for me is I know several people actually that are. So if you look up on Twitter, you can find all going to be the way I describe the people I know as friends, but they'll call themselves ADOS or ADOS, American Descendants of Slaves.
Okay.
There you go. So American Descendants of Slaves, ADOS. Look that shit up on Twitter. You'll find a whole wide variety of people with very different views that have a lot of very different things to say. But I know several people who can trace back their lineage. They know that back in the past there were slaves in their family. Most people that you see in this group, a lot that you're going to see firing off shit on Twitter are fairly conservative, successful women. Fairly conservative, fairly successful, and there's a debate of reparations or not. And I know a couple people are just like, yeah, we should basically, as far as I can tell, for a lot of them, it's fill up the conversation. Just, hey, shit happened. It was finally and dealt with and done with here and now.
I'm having a little bit of issue with you tonight, Mike. You're cutting out a little bit on me.
I've been noticing cutting out too.
Is it him or me?
I haven't had you cut out. No, I'm only having Fred cut out.
Okay. All right. Because that was driving me nuts. I'm always assuming in my headset's a giant pile of shit.
I've been hearing it from both of you guys. It's definitely me.
Okay. Yeah. You've been kind of cutting in and out a little bit here, and I'm just wondering if something was wrong.
Trying to speak a little slower so that my syllables come through.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, they're coming through they come through. It's just sometimes they stop.
That's correct. But so I heard most of your argument, which is there's this group of people that can translate their heritage back.
Yeah,
and
again, I was pointing out that there are people who definitely can do this, and it's interesting because a lot of the conservative and fairly successful people that are largely looking to close the argument out so that it's no longer a thing. And I can get that.
Yeah, that is reasonable.
I can too. Again, though, where I come in is the actual calculated value of what should or should not have been transferred.
Obviously, they're not looking for $20 in a handshake. Well, that'd be kind of insulting, wouldn't you think?
Well, again, no, that's kind of the point, though, right? Is if you have a contract that was made and broken, and you can trace back to the contract being made or broken, you'd also have to split that up amongst all of your ancestors, right? So let's say it was 40 acres in a mule, and you have 40 ancestors between here and 160 years ago. Well, guess what? Each one of you guys gets an acre and a 40th of a mule.
Well, here's some more groups of people that were similarly affected. Were not that are actually funny enough not the black reparations community to talk about either. Italians, Jews, Polish,
Irish,
Scottish.
Well, Scottish to small. Scottish were not so badly affected.
Yeah, no.
Irish,
Au contraire, my friend.
Not so badly as, say, the other four. I'd say arguably. But fine, 5 groups there right away. 5 groups of people that were, so with the Irish and the Polish especially, but just Irish we can start off with here because it's so egregious. People used to want slaves because, people used to want Irish people because slaves were too expensive. And Irish people would come over and work their indentured servitude, their 7-year contracts, and they would work them to death before their contract was up, and they were owed nothing.
Yep, and that was actually very common, especially amongst the ironworks. Some of the others up there.
Pre-end of slavery in the North.
Yep. So they typically, if you an ironworks would grab somebody from an indentured servitude, and this could be actually somebody who was not technically entering into it of their own free will.
Well, you can think of the people who brought them over on boats as being kind of like the coyotes of the South right now.
Yeah.
When someone comes over the border, oftentimes they are already sold into their slavery job, which you don't know about because they're illegal aliens and not tracked properly.
That's correct.
And this is not even talking about the more horrifying jobs they get sold into.
Yeah, so this is where this kind of ties into today, is because think about it, in about 50 years, these people who might be naturalized in by fiat, they might be coming back to the government saying, hey man, we got fucked here, you want to give us some money because we got sold over the border and a lot of our family members died.
Again, all of that's going to come down to, that's a good reason why we should nip it in the bud. Right? Like,
sure enough.
Truthfully, I really struggle with sitting there and asking people who never owned slaves to pay people who never were slaves money for slavery.
So that's where the argument that it's the government that made the promise and failed to keep it, or the government that fucked up, is where that's being made.
And
it's not being said that the people specifically are the ones responsible, but that the people as a whole, via the government that wrote the laws and enforced the laws.
But again, the people who are going to pay the bill are not the government. The government is a series of elected representatives.
But that's why they're laying the responsibility at the government's feet, because it's the government that was the source of the laws and practices. And obviously, the government at the end that was after slaves got crushed. Waited for the rest of the government, formed its own, fought a war, and fucking failed miserably. Thank God.
And the consequence of that is that there was no promise made, or there's no support, right? So,
but again, so you still had this persistence for these usurious contracts with human lives at stake that came after the end of the war, in the North and the South.
Well, and there's more to it than that too, right? Like the South switched over from slavery to sharecropping, which is just slavery with extra steps, except that involved white people and black people. So you'd have to then sit there and simultaneously demonstrate that the sharecroppers didn't actually deserve stuff because they still got whipped and beaten and all the other things.
Presumably, though, you could have that discussion. So say you could define a group of people that were definitely eligible for some kind of reparations. Were you to give them? Step A done.
You could do that. Yep.
Step B. Okay, at what point do we draw the line for where these... if it's promises made and not kept, when were the promises made? We can address those. Fine.
Yep.
If it's not specific to that, at what specific date is it plausible to define a time period in which the main problem, to a degree that is acceptable to these people, and they have to agree to something like this. At what point in time is it acceptable to say, okay, this is when we should move forward from to calculate some result? So there's definitely going to be some group of people you can define, and there's definitely going to be some date that will be agreed upon before things move forward.
But then you're going to also have to come up with a total sum, right, of actual injury, right?
Right, yeah.
And that's going to be very difficult because at the end of the day...
But then you at least have to cut down to a definable quantity of people to start from.
Sure.
You can start making methodological changes there.
That's good to have the injured classed. That's true.
Right.
And of course,
you can even have a class action lawsuit that defines the entire thing at that point.
Sure, absolutely. But then you'd have to sit there and come up with the actual value of what's transferred over. and intergenerational wealth over hundreds of years is very
One
rarely.
best thing though is now if you go back to the principal parties being restored. So these people injured would be the ancestors, and the owed amount would be paid out to their descendants, presumably.
Sure.
Have to define whatever schedule they use to get the payout, divided among people however they see fit.
None of that addresses the core question of.
Well, that does.
How?
Well, so here's how it narrows it down, at least. All right. It narrows it in, and it gives you a way where you have a range that you can define, and then you can say, all right, somewhere in here. Well, not that we know those numbers today, but just saying you can't get a range.
The actual
who are affected
can't be calculated. Sure,
the actual people affected. You
can limit the class. You can limit the class, and you can even define.
No. It's a separate class that I'm talking about here, because this is what actually defines the payout. All right, defines the actual injury and the cost. The people who are descendants, they descend from some group of people who are directly injured by the events, whatever the events were and whatever time they came. There were people who were directly affected. If you go by the principle of direct restoration to the injured parties, which is how basically all other forms of reparation have happened, then this subclass in time is definable and quantifiable, and that is the extent of injury in terms of the time and place.
You're still not defining the actual way in which we calculate the sum payment.
But it's narrowed it in so that you can't sit there and extend it over generations in an unquantifiable way.
It's
quantifiable now.
That's advantageous, but it still doesn't change the fact of what is the actual value.
So we've gotten from people who are affected. We've gotten people who are affected. When people were affected in the past, that defined the people who are affected. We've gotten to the people who are directly affected, and now you can talk about how are they affected and what is the cost. So to a certain extent, you have to define what is the say average cost of a person's life over the number of years they were affected.
Well, I mean, you'd have to define that in that time frame with that period of reference.
Sure.
Which is ultimately not very much.
Sure, and you could even say that.
20,
like I said,
$20 in a handshake may be generous if you actually go back to that.
The thing is, so if you go ahead and say, all right, well, let's define them in the context of other people who are working at the time, then it might bump that up. You might get $30 in a handshake.
I mean, realistically though, what a lot of people don't, we're sitting there and you get all of these folks who are coming in from the left, and they're looking at today's values and today's wages. And what a lot of people need to understand is, especially in the South,
we weren't this prosperous back then.
Yeah, human life once had a much lower value.
I'm sorry, but let's talk about like when slavery ended. We didn't have a lot of this country, did we?
Nope.
And we certainly sure didn't have a lot of the resources.
Well, and even then, the reason that we utilized slavery was we didn't have machines and we didn't have electricity, and we barely
productivity skyrocketed. Yeah. So if you go back, let's even go back to another thing we were discussing just recently. Here, let's say we grade things on an exponential curve, but we still grade them in the context of the full entire curve that is relevant. So if you start talking about these people's wages and lost earnings, we can even skip part of the livelihood argument to say they didn't get paid for their work. They had a livelihood, whatever. You know, let's say that everybody had a grateful and honest and thankful master that just didn't pay them anything, which we know is bullshit. But let's just say that terrible argument was made. Well, fine. That's lost wages over the entire time that these people were directly affected right there and then. Not even counting the ancestors that came before them that stepped off the boat. You know,
at the same time, arguably, you can make the argument that slaves were better taken care of and had better status living than other folks down there.
Like, you know, so one thing people just think, and this is one of those points of angry contention and which it's fascinating and it's very tragic at the same time. There were the people who were the house slaves and there were the field workers, and they were treated very, very differently. And one of the things you would not be able to do reliably nowadays, because even the ancestry can be somewhat sketchy, but we've already narrowed down to people who have definitive, concrete lineage established. you can't necessarily you'd be very hard pressed to find people who definitely had the same level of known ancestry and at the same scope, who also know the job status among the hierarchy that their ancestors had.
But the point that I was trying to make is that when we actually compare it to when we talk about your general day laborer down in the South, at that period of time, it is very plausible that the slaves were actually had better care taken of them than somebody else, and that's because they did have they did have a roof over their head. They did get medical care because it's expensive to replace them. And then on top of that, they still got food, and that was not; those guarantees were things that were not present for most of the folks that were down there. I'm not saying that
if you want to go that route, we could also talk about prisoners and prison labor today. That's a corollary, not a direct one, because they didn't do anything wrong besides get off a boat or be born.
Well, I mean,
for the most part, we could say that.
Yeah, I guess so.
For the vast majority of people, they weren't enslaved or sold off for day labor because they did something really fucked up. They just happened to be there, wrong place, wrong time.
Well, I mean, they were captured by folks and shipped on a boat, and it was all part of the normal culture of Africa.
Or they were born after the fact.
So, I mean,
wrong place,
and that's the chattel slavery is a whole separate kettle of fish. But the transatlantic slave trade was, when we started looking at
that was kind of a thing of the times.
Yeah, that was kind of a thing of the times.
Although you could say the same shit today, couldn't you, over in the Middle East? In certain places.
Was it as bad?
In certain places, it's worse. There are more people enslaved in Africa and the Middle East today than were ever enslaved in the entire history of the United States.
Yeah, but I mean, our population is perpetually growing, so that's kind of...
No, period. The entire history of the United States.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, since
and in
forever.
fact, there were far more slaves that were down in South America than were ever in the United States.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's a really kind of complicated thing.
Oh yeah, dude!
I thought
a big chunk of Brazil was slave.
Oh, you're talking about historically. I
in the entire history of the United States, shipped over for transatlantic slave trade in the United States, far less than in South America, and far less over the entire period of slavery in the United States than exists as slaves in Africa and the Middle East today.
Yep.
So that should give you an idea of the scope and scale. And the thing is that this is human misery we're talking about here. It's not something you sit there, you reduce it down to numbers. It feels inhuman because it kind of is.
No, I disagree.
We would say that one slave is too many, sure. Unless you kind of into that in the bedroom,
at the same time,
don't bring that shit here.
You could also go back and say that if they weren't enslaved over here, they would have been enslaved over there.
Well, this is basically true.
And that's kind of the problem that you have, is that fundamentally this was tribal war. So when you start talking about who's technically at fault, the question is, where does the origin begin?
The problem is that so here's where this argument opens up to somewhat horrible things. Is people will take this argument to say that people who are I keep saying it's not true. People who are American descendants of slaves. I mean, they aren't, for the most part, they are African descendants of slaves too, but they're Americans. The American descendants of slaves, they got shipped over, sure. You can talk about the tribal warfare and all that stuff, but people will come in and say, all right, pivoted so radically from being enslaved in the U.S. instead of enslaved in Africa that they shouldn't get reparations. Which is it's a fundamentally opposed argument.
Well, and that's kind of the thing and that was what I was going.
And you'll find people who wouldn't even call themselves racist. You'll find them in both political parties here, just to get started on that. But you'll find people who don't even think of themselves as being racist that think, reparations shouldn't be a thing because these people. They're here now. They're successful or not successful by their own merits today, and they're a lot of them are doing well. So why should we care?
Well, I mean, the more fundamental argument is that at the end of the day, how do you calculate the damage, right? So if the damage is calculated by comparing the origin country to the final country,
that would be pretty disgusting comparison.
It would, but it would also be a fair comparison.
Well, that's the thing I was saying before, though, is if you go back and you look at the people who were directly affected, it would be the last people in line before slavery ended, instead of the first people who showed up.
That's
and if you look at the last people in line, they were affected in the context that they were being affected, which is here, not there.
And that's
which is why I brought that up.
The argument that you've presented is the most reasonable and coherent one that I've heard.
So
I haven't actually heard that argument made by most people.
That's kind of patched together through several observations and discussions I've had, but it's definitely not like any one person that I've gotten that from. That's if I were to try to assemble from discussions and observations a reasonable way of describing a functional argument towards a definable methodology, that would be kind of the basis for it, and then it would be expanded or contoured from there. But again, like you have people who are in the context they were being affected, and in that context, there would be wages for day labor, and you have the entire time that they were doing labor, which you could even call their entire life up until freedom.
Sure.
And in that sense, there's definitely a way for that specific knowable quantity of people what the injury was. And, you can quibble over which number you use to define the cost of their labor and the time of their labor.
Sure.
But there's a way there are maximum limits on that.
And again, I think that you can kind of get to what you're talking about as long as you're going back to the original contract that was made and there was something that was broken.
Yeah.
But if you actually go back to the people who were in slavery, who are they owed compensation by? That's not technically the government. That would be whatever owner it was that they were going for, and they'd have to go for.
And that's the thing is if you go back to the standing argument before,
right?
You will not find a group of people living today that they could claim to have standing against, besides the federal and the state governments.
But even then, again, the federal government at the time that they were slaves is no more. It's gone.
That's the thing is you could even go back to the point before we had a presidential race. You could say, okay, at this point, if we're not going to go by the Emancipation Proclamation, we could say, okay, a few years less of pay.
Didn't free any slaves.
Well, we could say, all right, we could go a few years less of pay on the payout so that we could get a more definable date, if that's the way that we get to a definable date. And say, all right, the election of Abraham Lincoln, call that the day when the South seceded.
But at the end of the day, it is all substantially much more muddy than doing a calculation even on something like immigration, as has been demonstrated by the fact.
I bet you it's multiple trillions of dollars. We're talking about something that's going to make our current national debt look like pennies.
I disagree. I don't think it would be worth trillions of dollars. I think that even if we did all of those defining characteristics, like
I'm just getting a sentiment here. I don't have necessarily a defined sense of scale on this either. Kind of patch together some shitty methodology that may or may not work.
Even if we defined it, you still couldn't turn around and say, hey, yeah, this is this plus interest, right?
Right.
So you'd at most be able to claim a common wage at that time, minus housing and medical care costs and all the other stuff. So like what an average person outside of slavery would technically make as an income, as a net income, knowing that they didn't really have access to banking and they didn't really have access to the stock market and there really was an investment at the period of time. Then dividing that amongst all the relatives, by the time you're done, it wouldn't be very much. $20 or $30 and a handshake is
kind of a pittance.
It really would be.
Well, that's a lot of times that's actually a very common argument, by the way. It's like in this, and again, there's nothing like about race involved here besides the way the trade was set up with the people who were catching them in Africa. Just happens to be the way it is. Like it's a common argument that since you can't define it, or it would be so little that it would almost feel like a slap in the face. Why bother?
And I think at the end of the day, from what I've seen from the people who generally make the reparations argument, they're making the argument because they believe somehow that it would radically transform their lives and they would be doing better.
You know, and that's the thing. Is I find a lot of people do still think that, and regardless of how, you know, there's always going to be that partial emotional attachment to it, regardless of how well reasoned you come to a value. You know, and part of it might simply be a way of evading an upbringing of this virtual persecution.
Well, I suspect
that you are somehow less than because you came from, which is entirely internally instilled. It's not an externalization. It's largely a recognition of self that is not fully addressed.
I suspect that more often than not, the argument for monetization predominantly comes as basically the hindrance of slavery is largely a case of people who are trying to blame an external factor for their lack of success rather than the internal factors.
And, you know, for a lot of people,
failure to launch.
I could easily, well, it's not that easily. It's for a lot of people, it's definitely true.
Yep. And by the way, this isn't like a black thing. If you actually encounter white people that have failed to launch, they will blame everybody and their brother but themselves.
There are entire trailer parks full.
There are entire. I have family members who fall into that category.
Whole entire segments underneath the bridge.
Yeah, I have family members who literally have gone to therapy and blamed their parents for their terrible upbringing. Meanwhile, you know,
that's not paying for their therapy.
Certain individuals are happily working in very high levels of employment with, you know, the top of their career kind of thing.
Right.
So it's not. People do this all the time. It's not a black thing or a white thing. So when it comes to reparations, I just see it as another excuse, which is
actually it used to be a cliche. It used to be an Irish cliche. Why are you down at the pub? Oh, I could have had something.
Are you serious? That's an actual cliche?
Yeah, you know, had my parents not sent me out, I would have been fine.
Ah.
Now here I am doing what my father did down at the pub.
Well, and like, you know, this is, different families have different traits. So my family came here as, apparently, like I was raised under the impression that we actually came over as indentured servants. And that apparently was not true. We came through Ellis Island. My wife actually found the records for it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, she did.
That still could have easily meant that you guys had problems.
Well, apparently, like our research originally came back to the war of the war with the English crown, and my clan. A large portion of it likely came over at the time, okay. But it's not my family tree, so it's very likely that they got put into the Saugus Iron Works and worked there 2 years before falling into a molten iron pit because OSHA wasn't really a thing back then.
Right.
But, you know, you start taking a look at something like my family and my family's history. My great-grandfather, I think it's my great-grandfather, either my great-grandfather or my great-great-grandfather and great-great-great-grandfather started an ice house business back in the late the mid 1800s that was very successful.
Not the beer.
No, like the actual, like a physical ice house, which is how they used to handle it. They would cut ice out of the lake.
For people who didn't know, this used to be how modern refrigeration worked. You literally put ice in your larder, which would be or your cellar, same thing really. And the entire place was freezing, which is why all cellars were freezing at the time.
Yep. So 1920s rolls around, and the invention of refrigeration comes along with it. And all of a sudden, the ice house business didn't do so well. So my great-grandfather basically went up and took the entire family's inheritance and spent it at the bar. And so my grandfather ended up having to drop out of school, swept floors at GE, and eventually worked his way up to be head machinist. My father worked for most of his entire life at GE as an aerospace engineer, and now I'm a nuclear engineer. So, like, I mean, the point that I'm trying to make here is that over a period of time of 80 years, the idea of sins of the father really just breaks down because people will succeed or fail on their own. You can easily trash and my family's ice house business was like the entire Northeast at the time.
Damn.
So you can go from a small empire to nothing with the advent of new technology. And similarly, you can go from nothing to a small empire with the advent of new technology.
So
Or a large empire in the case of Facebook.
My great-grandfather and his wife separately managed to come over through Ellis Island, if memory serves, between world wars when shit was hitting the fan, and so they were like, oh shit, and they got out, and other parts of the family were not so lucky. See, mother's maiden name was Blumberg, so that's the area of Germany that they came through. So at the time when you came in through Ellis Island, if you had a foreignese name and they heard you speaking gibberish, they just went ahead and named you based on the town you came from.
Yep.
So
or they would bastardize the original name.
Yeah.
Or
and so if you go and you look at, actually, my mom recently found it. Tiny ass town, which is now in what's called Poland, but at the time was not there. That's the last stop before people came over here. So she found that recently and shared that with me, which is fascinating and all. But basically, they came over to the United States speaking fuck all for English, and made an insurance company.
Yep.
Sold it, had enough money to be able to support a family and so on. Kept doing that kind of stuff for a while. Grandparents. My grandmother was a real American. Ran away from her husband, or at the time, I guess, when my mom was 16. And she actually had, I think, my mother when she was 16. So, yeah, really.
Right. Yeah, things
I
were more quickly
mean,
back then.
Crazy shit.
My wife's family is actually from Poland as well, which is, I like the Polish. They're a sensible
Well, that's the thing is, it's funny because my family tree on that side went around, took both directions around the Mediterranean. So I'm Ashkenazi and Sephardic on that side. So they met in the middle in fucking Poland. and then there was a crazy ex-painter who got told his art looked like shit, so he went on a rampage and killed all the
You know what's
Jews.
really sad is I've actually seen some of the stuff that he submitted. It was not terrible.
It was garbage, though.
Oh, it was. I mean, it was no worse than Thomas Kincaid.
It was garbage.
Maybe better than
No,
Pollock.
he went. All right, look, he went. He was trying to get his ass into an art school, he thought very highly of his own art.
He
when
probably
he
thought
submitted
more highly of it than it actually was.
when he submitted that shit, when he submitted that shit as a portfolio and got rejected, I mean, he could have easily been a person who dyed his hair blue today, right?
Well,
Fucking a vegan who decided to nationalize the infrastructure because the people were too poor.
Going back with individuals who blame external events on their own internal failures.
That was kind of a big one.
Let's restate that as external peoples.
So basically, what we're saying here is that you could either be a person who blames himself in a trailer park, or you could try to murder all the Jews.
Or
somewhere in between
what I was going with, or let's be the edgelords that we truly are.
Oh,
you
boy.
could be a victim that is in need of reparations, or you could be an evil dictator who conquers the world. I mean, you gotta. There is so much potential.
You gotta wonder though, like, what happens if the United States government does agree to reparations, and they end up paying it in potatoes
or cotton?
Oh my god!
There you go.
Holy shit!
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
at that point you may as well say, well, how about paying it back in shekels?
Oh my god!
Christ. That was bad.
Oh, sigh.
All of that was bad. It wasn't just you.
That was
there was
terrible.
willing participants on all sides there.
We were. That's okay. That's okay. We have to have one
Yeah.
one moment
For the social justice people out there who are currently writing furious notes to their legislators.
This is screening our calls. That's all it is.
For the people out there who are currently writing their legislators about how podcasts should all be banned, the reason why that was hilarious is because it was so fucking awful. Not because we actually thought it was a good idea.
Did you have to explain it? I mean,
for some, I wonder that today very often.
Oh, sigh.
There's kind of not
For
even
some
really
people,
a point.
you really do.
It's very strange because all of my friends, I don't have any black friends, but I have like no white friends, and certainly no like WASP friends. Nobody falls into that category. So everybody's either like Jewish or Asian right now in my friend circle. It's really weird.
That's because they're all successful.
Put-up.
Oh shit.
Now, in contrast to what I said earlier, Craig actually means that. But yeah, so like I've always, it's always funny because when you actually talk to people who are in these groups that are like part of Oppression Quest, right? all of them are like completely normal and joke about racial differences or religious differences nonstop, and they are the most brutal on their own culture, on your culture. It's really funny. Like,
we were just talking about you got to hear the copper wire joke, which I'm surprised you've never heard before.
I have never heard of that. So
were we on air when we did that? I can't remember now.
Yeah, we were.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
That
one's out there for posterity.
When it comes down to like actual racial group stereotypes, I'm actually very poor with it. I've done a lot of my learning of slurs and everything else from the internet. You see it, and you're like, all right, what is that? And then you end up going to like the Urban Dictionary definition and writing immensely everything that you've chosen to do up until that point. The nicest one I think I encountered was SJW. That is the nicest thing that I have found on the internet in terms of like clean comments. But I don't
Funny
know
enough,
a lot of like the stereotypes. I really don't. It's not my thing. I take people as they are, and
I say, who do you go to for the best ethnic jokes?
The ethnicities themselves, all the time.
Exactly. If you want to know the best Jew jokes, go talk to a Jew. You want to know the best black jokes, go talk to a black guy.
I will trust you on that. It's been a while since I've had a black friend.
Oh, dude, the funniest shit is when they fuck with you with the angry black man thing.
Oh yeah, that's fun. Like I said, it's been a long time, but it's always fun. They act like super raged out. And you're like, holy shit!
Just stare at you.
And then all of a sudden they're just like they're like, I'm fucking with you. Just you're cool. And you're like, holy shit!
Like, hey, I thought you were gonna shit your pants, man. Yeah.
Oh my god.
I can say I'm lucky enough not to have really dealt with that, because, well, I don't know. Any of the black folks I've ever hung out with, they've been smart enough to know not to try and do something like that.
It's really funny when it happens, and they only do it once. Like, once they get you once, it's
well, they know you're gonna question it next time.
Right. They do it. It's usually within like the first hour and a half once they've decided they like you, but you're still a white guy. That's when they decide to pull it. And then it's like cool from there on out, and then you're all like, yeah. Yeah,
and then you're an 80s cop movie.
Yep, it is. It is kind of
you
like
don't say.
full of flesh wounds and
random flashy weapons that aren't supposed to actually exist outside a theater.
That's exactly right. Or you know.
Oh, wait, no, except that's just in GTA nowadays.
Now, before it's getting kind of late.
I imagine I could make a really tasteless Columbine joke right now, but we'll pass on for the moment.
Yeah. Do we want to wrap up our night of racial eccentricities with the George Floyd trial that's going on?
Actually, I think we can cover one more related thing there since we're going that route, which is nice and sweet short. Is poor DMX.
I know nothing about DMX.
That guy went to a hospital after he had a heart attack because he had a drug OD. He's got no brain function and no brain activity, and he's on life support. And so he's a steamed carrot right now. He's gone.
Yeah,
I was gonna make
he's
a
a
joke
vegetable.
about
It seems.
Like I don't even know if you could try ECT to try and get his ass back alive. I don't think it would work. Yeah. So he fried his brain and caused a heart attack, and now he's dead. But he's on life support.
I mean, he might not be, but it's pretty unlikely with the way that things kind of went down.
I do not see him recovering from that. And
So
I would love to be wrong because he's not a bad guy.
Is we got to run down to a Planned Parenthood, grab a blender, and
give him the Christopher Reeves treatment.
Don't do bleach, kids.
I'm going to hell, and it's going to be amazing.
And you're all coming with me.
No, you know what? I figure that, like, if I get stuck in heaven, how bored would that be? All problems are solved and everything's made out of clouds. I go down to hell, and I get to work with raw materials and fire.
Kids, by the way, make sure you go and don't listen to your parents' advice if they even know about this. Listen to Dennis Leary's No Cure for Cancer soundtrack. Stand up.
Oh, speaking of kids, since I found this thing over the last week, and it was brought up by Aubrey de Grey, which is just cool. I'll relink it in the chat here, but I know that Steve got a chance to look at this thing, and it's just freaking cool. It's called Demon Pour. And
I know that they keep saying that they're not like a practical joke or they're not an April Fool's joke, but it really looks like an April Fool's joke.
It kind of does come off that way.
Demon Pour 64.
Yeah.
The names, it's perfect. So
there's several things that are out there that are trying to do something akin to this. Actually, Linus Tech Tips covered recently one where there's a company that introduced like a way to bring scent into VR gaming, which was really cool. I mean, it's definitely it was an alpha thing that was pitched to them, but like it kind of worked, which was really cool.
Oh, they've been trying to do smell-o-vision for a while.
Yeah, but like this is because VR requires you to stand up and do shit. This kind of was doing it. Like you have to be actively engaged in the room. It's not like you put your nose to a camera, but like it was kind of doing it. So it was interesting. Anyway.
I saw this, and I'll be honest, it really, like, I know they're saying that it's not an April Fool's joke, but you scroll down through the whole entire thing, and it really reads like an April Fool's joke.
A little bit.
Especially when you get into the games, because they're, like, one of the games is going and sampling random bits of poo everywhere. And that's a legitimate thing that they list, and there's no way that's serious. No way.
Mechanical nanopores, huh?
Yeah. And they're trying to do it as a game where you're doing samples and you're doing molecular analysis. And it's really cool. But there's only a handful of actual techniques that work really, really well for this. And I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm just saying that
it looks like they're basically doing SOC microfluidics.
I think they are.
So system on a chip for people who can catch it. So this is the same an analog for this, which is admittedly here highly specialized and narrow in scope. So probably not necessarily related to this here. An analog for this that is definitely used in industry is the same way that all these companies that do the gene analysis, looking for SNPs in your genes, they use system on a chip microfluidics. They pass your spit sample after it's been highly diluted through a little kind of convoluted tube that sits on top of a piece of silicon wafer that's been etched in certain, kind of like a CPU, but it'll react to the presence of certain single nucleotide perturbations. So things that identify a variation in an entire gene. So you're not getting a full sequencing of your 3 billion odd base pairs. You're getting 15,000 genes. That's it.
And when we talk about this thing, they're talking about having the ability to do this with any number of compounds.
Yeah. So it doesn't have to be DNA you're doing it with.
Right. So again, this is all things that make me very skeptical of the project.
Well, that costs a lot of money to get custom silicon like that. That's the
right.
thing. That's immediately. It might not be a thing.
Yeah, I'm going with that, and then it has to be like you'd have to calibrate it.
And there's a silicon shortage right now because all the fabs got fucked last year.
Yep.
Which was not going to be over
that?
for another couple of years.
So I'm not. I will say that I saw it. It's
I am going to include the link
idea.
because it's neat, and
It's a great idea. It sounds like.
Yeah, I mean it's brilliant thinking, but
you need to actually make the silicon to make it work.
I don't think it's. Again, I still think that it's an April Fool's joke, even though they're trying to say that it's not an April Fool's joke.
Well, I'm looking at like this thing here. You know, they have this valuation cap. If they got $16 million for this so far, I don't know if I'm reading this right.
maybe.
I mean, I could easily see if you get enough money to do a piloting, like you can get custom silicon at a small scale at shit resolution. Like, you know, we're talking going back to the 100 nanometer process here. You can get that kind of low volume stuff at great expense still, because it's low volume, but it's scalably low volume. It can absorb higher amounts of demand because they do specialty work. You know,
and don't forget, right?
But you can still get it.
They're not doing specialty silicon. They're trying to write a chip that is going to generically detect this stuff, which very unlikely.
Well, here's the thing: it's specialty silicon because they haven't made it yet, or if they've made it, one or two of them. Like they haven't volume.
I mean, you have to figure they've got some kind of prototype for this thing.
Well, yeah. So what I'm saying is they could, like, that part at least still makes it plausible that they could have gotten the custom silicon done. It's just it's just they wouldn't be able to scale that. They wouldn't be able to scale that up even if they had optimized it in whatever way. They wouldn't be able to scale that up rapidly. Are taken up right now.
Even then, you're still talking about stuff that is you're trying to put this into mass production. You're not gonna get like good calibration on it. You're not gonna get any of the normal like. Mm-hmm. It really comes off to me like a scam. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it really looks like a scam because they're generically detecting stuff. They're
here's the thing: is there's ways you can kind of do that. Like if you had certain functional moieties that were going to be detected, you know, your carboxyls, hydroxyls, etc.
Sure.
You can have those detected in certain relative amounts, and then find a way to, you know, AI or other means of solving. The thing is, in all likelihood. But that's still not necessarily. So the problem here is still that, like, if you're talking about this, like in computer engineering world here, you're not going to be able to just slap an FPGA into a board, program custom silicon, even though you don't have it yet, and then have it work. You literally need the custom silicon because system-on-a-chip microfluidics is not something that you can just kind of model with a piece of flexible hardware. You need the actual specific task-related hardware on hand.
So for folks to give you an actual real-world example, my wife and I raised bees, and one of the things that I was interested in doing was trying to build a smart hive, specifically to detect. I'd like to get to the point where hive inspections are not something that we have to do, where we're not going in, we're not breaking up the structure.
Well, we want the bees, we just don't like the bees.
No, it's not that. It's that every time you go in, you kill dozens of them. You might accidentally kill the queen. Like, you're breaking up their entire hive structure. So, like, what I wanted to do was hey, we're going to just do a handful of tests to determine whether a queen is in there or not. And when you start talking about the total queen pheromone, there's like 12 or 15 different ones in different concentrations, and trying to find the sensors that are available for each and every single one of those is going to be difficult. Having a generic chip that does all of them is going to be stupid expensive. And they're not cheap sensors. Like gas sensors and liquid sensors are not cheap sensors.
I can imagine.
Because they get plugged up easy.
So is kind of to the point relevant here in a way that they could have actually done for relatively, again, relative is important here, relatively cheap. They could, you know, for whatever sensing they're going to be doing, they could have done split input and just had, even if they were doing it as SOC instead of as a sensor tool, separate ways of sensing individual components such that they could, again, build up a library of knowns, unknowns, and have an identification mechanism. But and have the ultimate goal of building a single system on a chip microfluidics device. But again, they still need to actually make custom silicon at some point, which is expensive. And like I said, you can't just write an FPGA. You can't just do some VHDL to an FPGA and then come out with a piece of custom silicon you would order eventually. You need to actually have the hardware on hand because nobody does silicon interfaced microfluidics in that kind of modular capacity. You kind of have to have a piece of hardware on hand, or you have to have an in-house dev like Google and Facebook and Apple, and just make your own silicon.
Yeah,
I mean, and
certainly
what
not.
I'm seeing a team of 3 people. They have, assuming the credentials are true, I haven't looked any of these people up. But a team of 3 people, and none of them are electronics experts. They're all like microsensing and,
Like if you work with silicon interfaced microfluidics, you've got to have some sense of it. But that should also come with the same sense that you can't just model the behavior. You're not going to get to a point where you can say, all right, let's talk to 16 manufacturers for 16 different sensing mechanisms.
Right.
And have them all agree to put their custom IP onto the same die in the fab. It's just not going to happen. Like that is something that you would have to broker nearly $1 trillion deal for.
Right. And all of that is, I getting it down to the price where it's a kid's toy, I don't see that as plausible. I really don't.
And there might even be some other shit in there. They might be doing like some IR spec and stuff like that, or UV Viz as a complementary.
I didn't see anything that looked like they were doing that. But then again,
that's fairly compact that you can do that with.
That's UV Viz.
UV Viz.
Yeah, there's not a huge amount of data here either. I mean, we'll have to wait till they actually do the long.
We're talking look. It used to be that you needed to have a fiber op and you needed to have a carefully calibrated sensor that was susceptible to you hitting the side of a beaker. I got to go ahead and learn on instruments like that, but it turns out that in the modern world we have LEDs and photovoltaics, and you don't have to deal with.
Okay.
You don't have to deal with necessarily having an interferometry.
Yes and no. We do have things that
if you want accurate, you need to do Michelson interferometry.
Right. So if you wanna do IR spec, gamma spec, or UV spec, and all of these are different wavelengths of light, which gamma spec would be for the rad world side. UV is higher.
I've only gone up to UV Viz. I haven't gotten to gamma yet.
Gamma's
thank God for that. Apparently, that's a bitch.
Gamma spec is really expensive. Like you basically got to lens shield everything, and then you
also have to deal with the fact that you're actively fucking up the stuff you're trying to study.
No, it just emits it. Now you might be
talking about emitters. Okay.
You might be talking about X-ray. What is it called?
Well, it's crystallography, X-ray diffractography. I've done wax and sax. I have not gone beyond X-ray though. And I wouldn't call wax and sax necessarily a form of spectroscopy so much as it is crystallography.
So typically X-ray analysis is bombarding it with something. I think it's usually like a gamma, a low energy gamma, knocking out the inner K-shell electron, and then sitting there and finding the relaxation energy of what replaces it.
Typically, what you'll do for the kind of stuff I'm talking about, just because like I said, what I'm talking about is the closest analog is Raman backscattering. That is still spectroscopy, but that is close to what I'm talking about here. Wide angle and small angle, so wax and sax, X-ray scattering is the stuff I was talking about. So that is akin, instead of having it go back directly to you, it will deflect off a surface towards the detector on the other side of the sample. So small angle is when it comes in at a shallow angle, and wide angle is when you have a much wider range of angles that you shoot shit at it. But it's always going to be within 0 to 90.
Got it.
So wide angle is more of the 0 to 90. Small angle is like within the first 1 degree.
And all of that's going to be determining what the actual energy imparted into the electron is, and yeah, it gives you...
It's very much about structure more than it is about the specific spectra of the material.
Well, the specific structure, the spectra of the material will tell you what the structure is.
Yeah, so you'll see, like, for a regular crystal pattern, you'll see 4-fold, 6-fold, 12-fold, 8-fold symmetries. You'll never see in a regular crystal 5-fold or 10-fold, but you will see that in a quasi-crystal. But for regular crystalline items, for other items, what you'll largely see is the orientation of the material, and that comes out of the intensity of the form with respect to angle of approach, both in the azimuthal direction and the polar direction. So you can see the sample's on a little turntable. It'll rotate around, and you can get the different angles of approach. And then the source can be moved up and down, kind of. So small angle is advantageous because you don't have to move it very far, so you just kind of tilt the sample more than you move the thing. But the wide angle, the detector has to be much larger.
And somehow my wife turned the friggin' temperature up to 90 degrees.
Fucking hell.
Like, what the actual fuck is that?
What's that, 2 days ago when it mattered, or was it today?
I don't know. I just walked by the nest, and the nest
might have just been something I was forgotten.
I saw this huge spectra. I'm like, maybe I bought... Oh! She moved the vacuum handle, and that must have spun it.
Oh, well, there you
Because
go.
it was resting... That vacuum handle was resting against the exterior.
That's quite ridiculous, honestly.
Why don't you have a lock on that thing?
That would be a little bit risky. Well, unlike you floated...
Where you have to tap the front and say, like, hey, Nest, I'm here.
Also, why would you have one of those?
Because it's amazing and pretty.
I mean, I had an Amazon Alexa when I was at the last place I was at because I knew I wasn't gonna fucking stay there.
Yeah, well, yeah, like if you know you're not staying, that's one thing.
Yeah, that's
like
precisely why I got it. I got it because I had the time and opportunity to explore it while I still had a way of getting the fuck away from it.
I have a wife who really likes home automation, so
and you can do all that kind of shit by yourself in your own home with no contact with an external server.
If I'm not mistaken, aren't you an engineer?
Oh, that's low. He's a nuclear engineer. Don't be that guy.
What does me having been an engineer have to do with the fact that I have a wife?
Oh, well, I'm sure you could engineer a solution to the problem.
Yeah, you could engineer another wife.
I could engineer another wife. I could engineer a solution, but while you gentlemen do not have the pleasure of regular access to actual natural pussy, I do, and I really like that. And if the compromise is having a CIA listening device in my house so that they can listen to me fuck my wife 3 times a week,
your dog does not count.
Listen, mister.
Have you been sheltering Champ?
Oh, shit.
Oh.
I heard that did not need... Yeah, he gives too much teeth.
Yeah. Well, now Biden might have the appropriate number of teeth.
Oh shit!
I'm sure that guy gums it a little bit.
Do you think he has dentures, or do you think he has them bolted in?
Ooh, that's a tough question.
Oh no, surgical screws, absolutely.
They might have come out. At a slow enough pace for him to just get those full dental implants. You know, I'm sure he's had plenty of money from getting that.
I mean,
that little
that's
bit
what
of
Hunter got, so I mean, I'm sure his dad got that.
Okay.
Oh, look, all my little minis are done for my 3D prints. Did you guys want to do the George Floyd trial, or do we want to stay away from that?
Do what? Sorry.
I don't know if there's much to really get into until it's kind of done. Well, it's just new.
I want to kind of reserve judgment on it, but from the shit I've seen so far, you know, like starting off with Mama and coming out, so I think it's today, where like the police just kind of, the ER person flat out said, yeah, fentanyl could have done it, and
yeah, it's like, he was going into cardiac arrest when I looked at him, and then the two
like
angles.
Like the knee was in the shoulder blade instead of the neck, that kind of shit.
Yeah, so at this point, it's kind of, in my opinion, better to just wait until we can break it down afterwards, because I don't know.
I want to see what the jury says at the end,
that
and what
too.
the judge says.
Fair enough.
I mean, if you've got something you'd like to add, feel free.
The only thing that was really a surprise to me, like, a lot of these things, whether, first off, when I watched the video, I did not think that the knee was on the neck. Also, coming from an ENT perspective, I don't believe it just because you don't have many fingers of space between your neck and your shoulder blade. You really don't. Most people are somewhere between 3 and 4 fingers of a hand, and that's a lot less than a knee. So at worst case scenario, you were resting typically on the back of the jaw and the actual shoulder itself. It wouldn't have been a compression hold. And I think we've talked a little bit about like some of the precursor, but the stuff that really surprised me was the amount of drugs in his system.
Oh shit! Yeah, when you finally saw that coroner's report.
Yeah, because they pulled that. I tried to pull the actual values, but it was like 11 nanograms per milliliter. Or something like that.
That is multiple times.
Kind of amazing the dose there.
Even if you are a heavy user, that is a bad dose.
That's a lot. And to be very clear, right? Like
and was it the admission that he had that the guy in the car made him swallow all the pills before he got out or whatever?
I don't know if that happened. I know they had.
I do know that guy pleaded the fifth and said he was not going to testify.
Too, right?
They have body cam footage that was allowed where it was physically shown that he had a tablet in his mouth and that he swallowed it. And that after that, people were like, well, why are they making a big deal out of his drug use? You're like, well, because he did a lot of fucking drugs.
I mean, that right there says that maybe he should have, like, had he immediately gone to the hospital, after, saying, hey, guys, I took something. He would have been under arrest, but, like, at least he would have been in a hospital instead of dead.
I mean, the difficulty is that, like, so I was an EMT. The difficulty is I'm not going to touch him until the police have him fully restrained.
Yeah, that was the other thing is
he was not cooperating.
That one woman, the firefighter woman they had in there from that was off duty that day.
Yeah,
like she had a really fucking.
Lost you for a second there.
By standard procedure, you don't interfere with the other first responders.
You don't. The cops go in first.
Yeah.
They secure the scene, and basically it comes out, and nobody likes to talk about it, but it comes out during your training that if they are dead by the time you get there, that is so be it. But it is better them than you, and that's really what it comes down to. Because you don't want to create, the standard rule of
protect yourself.
Is not protect yourself. Don't put yourself don't make 2 patients when you already have 1.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So you never do that. So it was that, and then it was the amphetamine plus the thing. So what a lot of people may not remember is back in the 90s, it was a very popular thing. I'm sure that both Craig, actually probably all 3 of us had it when we were in school. Is Dare was talking about speedballs, which back then was heroin and cocaine.
Right.
But nowadays the modern equivalent would be meth and fentanyl, and basically this does a push-pull effect.
Yeah, if you want to talk about a speedball, that's a fucking fast one.
Yeah, cocaine speedball. I mean, that was something. I can't say I ever tried one, but I've heard some folks say some stories. But I mean, Jesus.
So what it does is you take the stimulant and you take the depressant, and the stimulant accelerates your heart rate. It increases your body temperature, so you're consuming more sugars. You need to get more oxygen. And then you take the depressant, and the depressant slows your respiratory system, which results in a buildup, a decrease in overall oxygen, and a buildup of overall carbon dioxide within your system at a much higher rate than you would have with either of those drugs normally.
Well, here's the other side of this that is relevant from what I saw with the video and the coroner's report. This guy was post-COVID. His lungs were 3 times the weight they should have been because they were still inflamed. And it doesn't matter how they maintained that mass. The fact that they were 3 times the weights that they're supposed to be and thickened up, like hard to flex.
Well, you know what? We can actually take the man's own words. When he was sitting in his van, he said, I can't breathe.
Yeah.
And he probably wasn't lying.
So his lungs were, again, 3 times the mass they're supposed to be, and it's because of fluid buildup. They were turgid at autopsy. They were hard to flex. So they're fairly rigid organs, and that means that he had a really hard time breathing without drugs. So it's with the amount of shit he had in his system, it's kind of a miracle he wasn't dead in the car already. if he didn't take anything before he got out.
Yep. But that was the thing that I wanted to just go over was the amount of drugs. I was really surprised by how much was in the system.
Yeah.
Like, cause you're getting this conflicting report from the family that's saying drugs have nothing to do with it. And then the coroner's report was originally, well, that was what they came out with, saying, oh, well, motherfucking minis keep breaking.
Well, and then there's his girlfriend, which confirmed all the drug shit. Then her name was Mama, so it could have easily been, especially given the proximity to the last overdose and who he called to get him into the hospital. He easily could have been calling for her to help him out, get his ass to the hospital.
Yeah, basically everything that comes out just ends up being much more complicated than it needs to be. And
I still believe he was a mama's boy. I totally believe that. You know, it sucks what it is, but that's what it was. He's dead.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, the thing that's really surprising is how people are trying to play trying to ignore the drugs as a complicating factor, as well as all of the. I mean, I get that there's emotions, and all of that runs high, but you know, now we have the film camera that shows that it doesn't look like the knee was on his actual neck, which was kind of what it looked like to me, because it actually looked like he was popping a squat on the dude.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Is like I watched the original video. Yeah, I watched all almost 9 minutes of it. That sucked. Yeah, that definitely was not a highlight of the day.
Yep.
And I saw that this guy had a knee on him, and I was sitting there looking at it, like, if the guy could breathe, like he could breathe enough to say shit.
Yep. And that's the thing that a lot of people, I think, don't understand, is that if you're talking, you're breathing.
And he also, like, he was breathing enough to talk. He was conscious enough when he was to talk at that time.
Yep.
The cop clearly was being, in my opinion, was being negligent and not checking on him to the point where he could determine whether or not he could remove pressure and lessen the restraint. But that's not here or there with the way that he died. I think that after that, when I found out about the COVID and the drugs, it was kind of case closed for me.
The thing that I don't understand is you can't really. It's not easy to check to see whether there's no like. Okay, he's had
a pulse. It's kind of important, you know.
Yeah, but I mean,
and you can sneak a finger under your leg.
At the end of the day, like if you're actually trained as a first responder,
they
you know
even
a
check
couple things. Well, they did, but I mean, when you're trained as a first responder, you know, people lie. And that's unfortunate.
He could have been playing possum, but if he did that with his heart, he's really fucking good at it.
Well, I mean, it all depends on how often you can actually get the check in. Right. 9 minutes.
If he's struggling, it is hard.
A lot of people think 9 minutes is a really long time. It's not.
Well, here's the thing. It kind of is for emergency services, though, because the people that were called in as for emergency service that day, the medical team that was called in, they went to the wrong place first, and then they had the time to turn around and come over.
Yeah, there's that. If they'd have gotten there on time, then maybe the whole thing might have been a completely different outcome.
It would have been 5 minutes instead of 9. He would have been alive at the time they showed it.
I mean,
way to the hospital.
Yeah, they would have had drugs right there that they could have. I mean, they could have definitely administered some of the things they needed to administer that might have helped.
Done some things, but like
the problem is that when it comes to drugs, like the only thing that they have that can pull them out of an overdose is Narcan. That's the only thing. And that can only pull him out of an opioid overdose. Because he had everything else in his system.
Yeah, his heart was going to blow out.
He was going to explode. I mean, like, that's...
If he pulled out the Narcan, that would have easily allowed him to go into overdrive. That was too much. And his lungs, like, had they intubated him and got him on assisted breathing immediately, and then put the Narcan in, maybe...
But you can't intubate somebody unless they're unconscious.
Yeah.
That's
pretty much
the matter is like, and this is one of the things that I think a lot of people don't understand is you can't take action until they are basically out.
If he's sitting there screaming and shit about this shit,
and you're not gonna feed a tube down his nose. Yeah.
And I mean, you still wouldn't be able to, right? Because if he's
he wouldn't be able to do positive pressure.
If he's screaming and he's conscious, that means that first off, you're never going to trach him. Like, you only trach people when their thing is closed, when he's choking. So if he is conscious and he is being combative, trying to escape or being whatever, right? You don't go in. You don't go in. Like, if I was an EMT, I would not have gone in. I would have let the cops do their thing, and I would have been one of those other officers standing there on the side. And the reason is because if I walk up to them and the cops think they have him calm and I can start my treatment, all he'd have to do is turn around, grab a gun, grab a taser, grab something else, and all of a sudden there's a whole bunch more victims on the round. And you do lie about it all the time, and that's the sad part, is that the cops have to make that judgment call, and that's not an easy judgment.
Here's the fucked up thing is, it's also plausible, assuming the EMTs were on time, etc. too. Have they just tased the guy?
That would have killed him.
And if they just rendered him unconscious.
The problem is that
that's the part where it's a difficulty, is he was in such a unstable.
Yeah, what would a taser have done to him at that time in that state?
It would have
probably just stopped his heart.
It's entirely possible, yeah.
Like, that's one of the things that I think is kind of, and I tried making this argument early on in this whole entire thing. To me, it looks like there was nothing that could be done.
Yeah, sorry.
It kind of looks that way. It really kind of does. It looks like this was kind of a perfect storm for Mr. Floyd.
Right. At the end of the day, and I've seen, like, if you watch Tim Pool, he's like, I feel so sympathetic to people who are addicts. I don't have that sympathy. My wife and I are probably going to have to deal with one of her family members who is an addict. Yep. Yeah, it's going to be a fun road.
Well, a buddy of mine, so it's actually a guy who turned his life around, thankfully, later on, but he died definitely before his time for other reasons. He spent a number of years with drug addiction problems and was able to turn his ass around. After basically everybody had given up on his ass, he went ahead and he's rock bottom, I'm going to the military.
I mean, power to you if you can do that.
But then there's people who are just users.
Right, and I mean, like, I know that she took my Adderall, like a fresh script of Adderall.
Hell no.
And apparently she just recently stole her sister's pain pills after her surgery. So, like, we don't know what to do. Like, the addiction is hard. The only actual
you gotta find a way to either get her into a place, or you gotta tell her that you're done.
Well, the problem is that the rehab doesn't work because you go back to the same environment. The only effective strategy is to actually...
Well, rehab can work, but anything can work because you have to have a person that wants to heal first.
If you get someone into rehab, the first thing that it does is it gets them out of the action environment where they're going to cause problems and gets them between problems, which is when you can actually implement a change of location or other kinds of things like that.
And I think the only strategy that I've seen that works fairly well is a change in location, specifically to dry counties where there's no way to go back into it. Yeah. And they have to be willing to go through that change. And I know somebody who I have a friend of mine, his brother went through the whole process. They sent him out to spend a lot of money to try to get him clean, but it was a heroin addict back in the day. And he did. They sent him out, I think, to Washington State for 6 months in some sort of super fancy rehab. And then that moved him to a halfway house in Utah, which is Mormonville, but it's pretty much a dry state. And then once he was in the halfway house in the dry state, he never really went back to alcohol or booze or anything else. He was able to get himself a job, and he basically, he would limit his time with his family because whenever he flew back to come see them, every single day was a risk, being in that same environment where he would go back and touch base with his friends who were still doing drugs.
Yeah.
So that's the only way I've seen it successful. I mean,
that's the thing I see that might come out of this trial, might be something useful for the family if they're legitimately at this point now still seeking closure. I'm certain that that's still the case.
I mean,
it sounds like this drug dealer basically killed him.
Yeah.
It's like if he had to take pills before he got out of the vehicle, and that was the thing. But the only reason, I could think of a judge not admitting that as evidence in a civil trial is to prevent double jeopardy for a criminal trial.
Well, I mean,
the thing is, if this falls apart,
I don't think that's necessarily what the judge is doing, but that's the most reasonable excuse in my mind that he might do that.
Yeah. Well, and as I was about to say, if this does fall apart, the charges with Chauvin, then they can immediately fall on him.
I mean, that guy. Well, it sounds like they need to yesterday.
They probably already should have.
Yeah.
Lest they want their fucking city to burn, but it already did once.
Like, that guy needs to be in prison regardless, but, like, I think there's a pretty good case, if that testimony was true, and for a criminal proceeding to go against him for second-degree murder.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
Absolutely not premeditated, but definitely, like, a crime of passion kind of sense there. It's definitely one of those.
Yeah, at least a voluntary manslaughter.
The actual, I think it's third, is what...
Okay, let me move back a step there. He didn't intend to kill him at the time.
Right.
So manslaughter serves the third degree.
But, I mean, yeah...
He should definitely be in prison for murder, I think.
I'm not seeing much in the way of, like, coming out against Chauvin. I used to be, like, super anti-cop. But at the same time,
So it depends. Like, the thing is, everybody can always say, like, I'm super anti-bad cop. But, like, it's not the police themselves necessarily, but the things that can be permitted to be done that are beyond the purview of their function, which use them as a tool of the state to do something immoral or illegal or unconstitutional, versus necessarily cops in general being bad people. Like, they're usually out. The vast majority of them are there to help you.
Yeah, they are.
They really are, and it sucks that they get skewed by the few people. Like, Chauvin's not a good cop. He's not a good cop. He's an asshole.
Yes, I do believe that.
Power-tripping asshole. He
gets
moved from precinct to precinct. He gets moved from precinct to precinct to erase his problems like a goddamn kitty diddling priest. So we could put that out the window at the onset there. But he probably didn't murder the guy.
Yeah, I'm in kind of a similar situation with this. Like, I'm really not a fan of cops. I'm not a fan of the guy himself. But I mean, I don't know how much culpability he really has at the end of the day for the death of George Floyd.
I could see a negligence argument to a certain degree, but again, I don't know if it fully qualifies there. I think there's a much better argument to go after the guy who pushed pills on him right before he died. Like, if it was really the case that he got told, chug these now, I'm not going to prison or whatever.
Yep.
Like, I think that's the case for third.
I mean, even though, like, I think based on the levels that were in his blood, he had to be doing more than just that round of pills that he imbibed.
It couldn't have just been the ones that made him and his girlfriend feel kind of extra stimulated and right before his overdose immediately before he died. Like, his overdose immediately before that day. So the one that he went to the hospital for. It couldn't have just been that. If he got pushed those pills and the drug dealer was like, yeah, man, I still got these, and then in the car he says, oh shit, take these now, I can't go back or whatever.
And by the way, when it comes down to addicts, a lot of them will sit there and try to, like, if they're up too much, they'll go get drugs to bring them down. And when they're down, they'll go get drugs to bring them up. And I knew we had a girl at one of the jobs that I worked at who was very much of that lifestyle. And she walked in, she'd had, like, God knows what the night before, but she basically crashed in the back, and she couldn't manage to pull herself out of the tailspin she was in, so she disappeared for about 30 minutes, came back, went into the bathroom, and was perky and happy and everything else for the rest of the day.
Yep.
And that's, like, there's people that will sit there and, like, oh, I'm too high,
hell,
down.
Like, I knew someone briefly, because I was visiting my friends down in Orlando. I was up here at UF. I was visiting, and we had when I go down there and visit, we'd usually go out and we'd have beers, or we'd go to someone's place and get ourselves hammered. And there was this one girl. She was a fucking mess. I was helping take care of her with another that day. That's it. Like, just alcohol, not even fucking water. And this retard is puking up parts of her stomach lining into one of those little Ziploc containers for the little food containers. She's like puking up. I could see her fucking clear liquid because, again, she just had alcohol that day.
Oh, man.
And I looked there, it's like, you realize that will kill you. Parts of you are coming out. And then she went to the bathroom, she came out, and she was all kinds of excited again. Yeah, and so she took something, and so the friend I mentioned before who had some drug problems was there at the time, and pretty sure that's where that came from.
Yeah, that's not somebody that's going to last a long time.
Yeah, I have no idea what happened to her. My guess is that she ended up on the street or something, or hell, she might have ended up happy with a family and so on, but I really doubt it.
Well, I mean, and I know that the girl that I was talking about, like, she decided to put herself on, like, a gold digger website, literally,
Yeah.
it's like golddiggers.com or whatever. So she just kind of wanted to be taken care of. Or what is it? SugarDaddy.com.
Right?
Yeah. So she's okay with she was very much okay with doing what she had to do to have a stimulus in a spending account.
Well, there you go, I guess.
So, I mean, I get it. Addicts have problems. It's a really difficult thing. I don't think we have adequate protections or an adequate system within our system of governance. And that's something that I think that we could work on improving and should work on improving. But I struggle to draw the line where I'm supposed to be sympathetic to a cause when an individual is, like, perpetually getting themselves arrested for drugs and never pulling themselves out of the inevitable
thing
spiral.
is, it's a gradient, and you kind of have to pick your battles. That's why I usually, like, especially for these kinds of things, like, I won't like give to a charity for this kind of shit. I'll just help people on the side.
Yeah.
Because direct help is the best help you're gonna get for these kind of situations.
That's the complete truth. You know, if you're helping out,
it's unfortunate that you
the
can't
only
have
way you can help
dedicated.
indirectly with something like that is with places that do one-for-one needle exchanges and do methadone
that kind of
programs.
stuff. Yep.
That kind of stuff. You're not going to
So,
be.
like, that's the thing is when people, so in California it's horrific because of this. But when they don't do one-for-one and they just hand them out like candy, the problem just balloons. And these people will their lives to spiral down with them.
Yeah.
Because that is what makes them feel secure oftentimes. That they've made good decisions there. They can at least ignore their bad decisions if they have people who are doing it with them to diffuse the blame.
And then, of course,
that's
is its own
again
spiral.
All like enablers are just
reasons why the only effective way to handle the situation is literally moving away from it, preferably to a dry county. Like, that is the only thing that is ever shown in the literature to have an effect. 12-step programs don't work. Rehab doesn't work. Therapy doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, like I had said at the beginning, the only thing that an addict can do is not want to be an addict anymore. You really have to want that.
Yep.
The only other way is not have it, just like you say.
Yep.
I mean, those are your two options.
Everything else, if they aren't willing to sit there and make their own changes, and that's where I struggle with this case, because there's clearly a lot of drugs. It's been habitual drug behavior. Is that a shame that he died? Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, because of the drugs that were in his system, because of the amount of drugs that were in his system, I see the death as inevitable. And should I be sympathetic in that case? And I struggle with that. I really do. Like, I very firmly believe that God helps those who help themselves. And that's not in, like, a selfish motif, but the bottom line is whenever it comes down to somebody seeking sympathy from me, I'm always taking a look at all of the extraneous factors. What did they do to get into their situation? Because I struggle to believe that I, as an individual, should pay for the mistakes of other people with the resources that I gained from not making those same mistakes. Especially when the path is laid out at the beginning.
So that's the thing where you have to. That's the kind of charity aspect of it, though, is putting in the time and effort to make. It's kind of part of the idea of leaving the world better than you found it, but it's more to it than that. It's a selfish form of altruism.
Well, there comes a time when you've done a little bit too much.
If you don't help the people around you to kind of keep a certain standard of living that you want.
See, and that's...
You don't have to be the only person who does it.
And that's where I disagree. Is at the end of the day, I believe that.
Well, it's
that
a broader environment than your own home, right?
You gotta cut bait. Is in short what my worldview is.
There's that. Everybody's gonna have to have everyone has a different threshold on that. But the point is, like, if you're going to environment around you that a certain standard you want to live to that extends beyond your front door.
Oh, and that's true.
And you gotta be part of maintaining it. And so that's the part where, if I'm gonna help out with stuff like that, I just help. I'm not gonna pay someone else to do it for me.
And I agree with that. I don't think charities do a particularly good job for the most part.
Like, there's some that do good, but and a lot of those kitchens, the poorhouse kitchens or the soup kitchens, they do great.
Yep. And that's pretty much like their overhead is very, very low. They rent a really cheap space in a really cheap neighborhood. They're putting together the world's shittiest food. Yeah, they're putting the world's shittiest food together with a whole bunch of people who don't necessarily want to be there.
Yeah, but again, a lot of people would have no food otherwise. So it keeps them from going and finding food in places that would basically crap up your surroundings.
And I support the food shelters, we donate food every year. We tend to donate. We usually do like the sponsor a child thing is one of the charity things.
If I'm leaving a bar and so on, and I hit up a hole in the wall pizza place, and I happen to see a guy sitting there, I might walk up and say, "Hey man, can I get you a slice?"
See that I don't do. I believe very firmly that the fastest way to increase homelessness and poverty is to pay for it, quite literally.
So here's the important distinction. I don't tell them, "Hey man, do you want a 20 to go get a pizza?" because I know that's going to get spent on alcohol or drugs. That is very much the important thing there is if I'm basically got a pizza and I'm like, all right, I'm about to leave here, and there's a guy there, I'm like, he looks hungry and whatever. You help out. Like, it's not every time. You don't want to captive audience.
I actually don't disagree with that. I've done similar things myself. If I've got leftovers from a place.
That's the problem that I have is the captive population. And if you go out to Boulder, Colorado, right? So when you see
that's very different there.
When you see South Park and they do their episode on homeless people,
that's
it's
true.
a real serious problem in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah, that's very much different than fucking Florida.
And we've come full circle back to Colorado where they have voter ID laws.
With all the insane shit that we do in this town for homeless people, I think it was listed as the number 10 out of the top 10 places out of the 10 least friendly to homeless people cities in the country. I think Gainesville was number 10 one year. I don't know fucking how, because they take over certain parts of town.
Well, and that's kind of the thing is that up here where I'm at, and actually in a lot of the places that I've lived, they have homeless cabals. Yeah. They work specific street corners.
Yeah.
And they all have their iPhones. They basically work street corners like it's a job.
If I see a guy with a phone hanging out who's homeless, my intuition is they have an income.
So my view is always that, if you want something, I am a capitalist to my core. If you want something, pay for it or provide resources to it. And that includes homelessness. So I would like to see more soup kitchens, but I don't necessarily want to see more homeless people, because that way at least the soup kitchen will there's a degree of separation between me and them.
So here's one of the places in town.
Requires them to engage in effort.
One of the places in town that does homeless outreach, and this is I bet you this is one of the reasons why we're at number 10 out of the 10 least friendly to homeless people. One of these places in town is basically they will offer you a suit, they will offer you a place, they will offer you career counseling, and they will offer you free food, provided you go to the interviews they set up for you.
Well, that's not actually all that unaccommodating.
Good. And as you might guess, very few people take them up on the offer.
Well, and that was.
I can believe that also.
So it's a relatively small operation because not every homeless person is looking for this service.
when I was in Massachusetts, a lot of the Massachusetts shelters were, they were substance-free shelters. And so there was this move to start saying, hey, well, let them come in with their bottle of booze and no questions asked. And, again, I struggle with that because if you do that...
That one is a big no.
Yeah, no,
like,
shelters
and when we
need
start talking
to...
about the homeless population, when we start talking about the addicts, there's a lot of mental illness that goes into that. And
sure.
That, that's one of the reasons why I think that it was a mistake to close down the asylums, because we did create
wholeheartedly agree.
Appropriate treatment.
I can't believe we did that. It was the
most
humane thing to do was to keep them in a place like that where they're at least kept from harming themselves.
And
like,
I get it,
for
right?
instance, the Nation of Islam guy from just this last week. Like, he needed help.
Yeah.
And he would have gotten it at one point. Instead, he goes and rams a barricade and kills a guy and gets himself killed.
And there was that the kid who was the shooter in Texas, right? Like, that kid had a mother who was what's the name for him? He was a autistic kid.
What, SSRIs?
His mother was a substance abuser. He had they turned around and referred him to such a program, he probably would have gotten treatment and care and counseling, and maybe they could have weaned him into a position where he was going out in the real world, but still had a place that was controlled and safe for him to go home to. And I get, like, if you go through the history of the asylums, yes, there were some that were bad, but the majority of it was, like, grossly overblown, and that is one of the biggest downsides, is that instead of creating a safe environment for these people to live, and where we can send people who need to get clean, now all of a sudden the cost of addiction, the cost of mental illness is foisted off on the families and
the general public.
Like, and the general public. We don't have the resources to handle it.
We were basically paying a lower cost to handle a significant problem.
Yep.
And if I'm going to be honest, I think this topic in and of itself is almost worthy of its own full show, because, I mean, it's going to take us at least an hour or two to really get into what sort of horrible damage has been done to mental health in general just by the destruction of asylums.
I mean, a lot of homeless.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, these people, we used to take care of these people.
Yep. Homeless. Well, and I mean, you gotta think of it as like it used to be, oh, poor thing, for mental illness. Now we treat it as if it's, it comes with a social stigma, and so even people who are functional with meds, like say antidepressants,
I invite
they face the fear of telling that to their employer. And
I invite both you guys, and hopefully he doesn't get pissed at me for airing this, because I'm probably not going to be upset about it. He tells most people. I invite both of you guys to talk to Max about a family member of his in the other Discord server. Ask him about his brother.
I suppose I'll have to do that at some point.
Yeah.
It's a shit story and all, but he's out there somewhere.
I mean, if you want to talk about like going back to the originator of the topic, right? Mr. Floyd there, if he had had a treatment center that he could walk into and be taken care of, this might not have happened, right? If
that's
we
a real possibility as well.
Well, had the hospital held him for an extra day or two.
Yeah.
Even that.
And I mean,
that's a precious resource, but even still.
Well, I mean, the problem when it comes down to the hospitals is that is the most expensive way to handle the problem.
It is. No, embedded enough in that is an extremely expensive way to handle the problem.
And this is again why the asylums were a public good.
Well,
we had these things; they were cheap facilities.
Should have referred them to the mental hospital. So, you don't have to keep them in a ICU bed or in a standard inpatient bed. Like, you could turn them to a mental hospital. But then again, you can only get a 72-hour hold, at least in this state.
Yeah, that's pretty normal for everywhere. A 72-hour involuntary hold.
Yeah,
that's the maximum that you can do.
And if they did a 72-hour hold on every addict who comes in with a fucking OD, then
every single hospital bed would be full, and there's nothing like we wouldn't be able to render care. It is a screwed up situation.
Yeah.
It is a screwed up situation.
Well, here's the funny thing though: is if you added more beds, if you just built another wing and added more beds for just the psych area that would take care of addicts specifically, you wouldn't even need necessarily more doctors if you're just trying to keep people there for a few days. You just need a fuck ton more orderlies.
Well,
to keep their asses inside a bed.
Well,
and check, make sure they're alive.
Because don't forget, right? Like, you would need to, if you wanted to do a proper addiction thing, again, you have to relocate them, right? So what you'd have to do is you'd have to go to dry counties. You'd have to get them to sign off on building a ward, and you could dry them out in a hospital or something like that for a few days. But then they'd have to get shipped out there, and then you'd have to start trying to build an economy in that area.
Well, here's what I think is plausible in that scenario is you can offer them the ability to get out after 2 days instead of waiting for 3 days. So remember, at this point, they're kind of jonesing, and this is taking advantage of a person who could, I would say, could be arguably legally incapable of making a decision. But fuck it at this point, just for sake of argument. Offer them after 2 days the ability to skip the last day, certain treatment program elsewhere.
I mean, but again,
if they're really jonesing hard, they might take you up on that, and then you just ship them off.
Well, but again, the problem is that the treatment programs, like addiction services, are ridiculously expensive.
Yeah,
and that goes along with we
not
had
only
a cheap way of handling this.
Yeah.
And we basically.
I felt a lot better. Crack my back just there.
Yeah,
sorry.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah,
but we had a cheap way to handle it, and we're no longer doing that, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. I mean, really, we might do well to actually legitimately do a whole show on that because it is such an expansive topic. Yeah.
Well,
and the lack of it and treatment in general in the world today. But I mean, we've already gone a while, and
we have gone a while.
If we keep on this, I mean, the show's going to be 4 hours, and we're already at 3. So let's probably go ahead and just call it for this one.
Fuck me, we are at 3.
We are at 3. I will not fuck you, though.
I was not asking you.
Well,
nor demanding. So
you never
we'll
know.
just leave it at that. Anyway, everybody, I'm Evan. Look me up at that fake guy Dan everywhere. Craig?
At CraigBob99, just about everywhere.
And you can try and look up Steve if you want at Ratman720, but you might not get any reply at all ever.
He's at Ratman720 is the gayest man alive.
Is that what it's at? Well, you know what? That's okay because I don't actually sit there and check my profile all that much.
But Ratman720 with the extra homoerotic emojis in the title.
Come on, extra homo sauce. That's what we want.
It's all about the sauce.
Nothing wrong with it.
Nothing wrong with it.
If you want. All right, I'm done.
But if you got any questions, ideas, show thoughts, or anything, hit any of us up. Probably best to hit myself or Craig up since we're actually pretty active on the...
You can find me for the most part on Twitter.
Yeah.
To be fair, I used to be much more active on Twitter, but again, I live in a magical realm where I don't get to have my phone or access to the internet, and they monitor everything, so I'm sure as fuck not going to go on Twitter.
No, fair. Yeah, no, that's that, and I mean, it's a hellscape, too, so, it's
that is true. It is. My mental health has significantly improved since I left Twitter.
Yeah, if I hadn't gotten on there back when I was deeply broken, I would probably have lots of issues with it now.
Yeah, I'm not super excited to be there. Plus, I mean, they throttled me enough, and it requires a lot more effort to grow the account now. And though I'm really hoping DeSantis comes through and finds a way to just fucking put the screws to these people.
Well, I suppose there is actually one quick update we can throw at the very end of this for people that might be following SCOTUS. The
hour number 4.
Not quite. But Clarence Thomas issued a dissenting opinion on the on a recent case about Trump being breaking First Amendment precedent or something by blocking people on Twitter.
He basically turned around and said, "You fucking hypocrites! Stop being fucking hypocrites."
See it more as a Fifth Amendment issue.
Yeah, but basically what's happened here is it's opened up the door to ask the question of, is Twitter a public forum? And should it be, regulated like AT&T was?
Those
maybe.
who are looking for the broad explanation, they sued Trump because Trump banned people, right? And they
on Twitter,
said, hey, it's a public forum and the federal government's not allowing people to blah, blah, participate in the public forum. That went through the courts, finally ended up at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court kicked it out saying it doesn't fucking matter because he's been kicked off Facebook and Twitter anyways, and oh yeah, by the way, he's not president, so go stuff yourselves. We're not wasting our time.
There's people that sued him that got unblocked.
Yeah.
And Goo is one of them.
Now, the key from Thomas's decision is Thomas's decision said that if you truly wanted to make the argument that these are public squares, then we should probably regulate them as we would
like a public
utility.
Yeah, that's what he said.
And common communications. Right? Like you can't turn around and discriminate.
That punts Section 230 in a way that it shouldn't. So Section 230 is a defense someone uses in summary proceedings. And
the way that this should challenge them is that they should be challenged under Section 230.
Yeah, so they should be challenging that in court and contouring Section 230 the way fair use was contoured. The fair use doctrine is as powerful today as it is because it has been tested in court so often. Section 230 is just blanket accepted because it is codified as initialized. And instead of just, putting opinions towards that, a lot of judges have been afraid to do anything with it, and nobody has to proceed against it. So there's no contouring going on. There's no shaping of the legislation with case law, which is what's needed. This fair use is also in legislation. It's just that the case law has overridden it to such a degree that it has certain benefits and certain weaknesses. For instance, you can go after someone for copy fraud because it exists. Well, you wouldn't be able to do it otherwise.
All of that being said, a lot of conservatives are making some serious hay about Roberts' decision. I don't think it was as significant as they like to claim.
Well,
but basically
said it, and if you say it in a dissenting decision, then it's one of those things where it's from fly on the wall to on the wall, right?
Well, it basically
from the wall to on the wall.
It opens up a legitimate legal avenue to go fight back against Twitter and Facebook's banning of people.
So,
and
if it comes out as a means of legitimately going after Section 230 defenses in court, that will have the desired outcome.
Mm-hmm.
If people just go after Section 230 wholesale on First Amendment grounds instead of trying to contour the law appropriately, I don't think it's going to help as much because it's going to end up back in the SCOTUS, and they're just going to go back to the winning decision.
Well, that's the thing is they punted on the decision.
Yeah, it either needs nuance or needs to be enforced more strictly, and
they threw out the entire case. They threw out the entire case, but that's not to say so they threw it out in a unique way, right? They're not sitting there. They basically threw the whole case out.
Right.
Saying that it doesn't matter. So they didn't rule on it. They didn't rule against it. They just said it doesn't matter. Which seems to be the general trend with the Supreme Court these days.
Well, yeah, it's because the asshole in charge of the damn thing, the Chief Justice, is a little bitch.
Yeah, Roberts has proven himself to be absolutely valueless.
He has caused so much chaos in this country from the inability to act.
Who is this?
Justice Roberts.
Yeah, John Roberts.
Chief Justice. He could have. He was shrieking in the fucking back room about the whole people rioting on the streets and shit. This is of course before January 6th. He could have alleviated so much pressure just by making a shitty decision. Had Trump come in with the SCOTUS, laid out evidence, and then got ruled against anyway. Like, it still wouldn't have been as crazy as January 6th.
Yeah, if literally any case had actually been heard on the merits and dismissed on the merits, we would all be having a different conversation, and the world would actually be a very different place right now. But that has yet to happen.
That would have actually given Biden the merit behind saying something as stupid as "I want to unify the United States, unify the American people." Like,
or even the slightest modicum of legitimacy, even just any at all, some, an extant amount for which there is none currently.
Like, and the important thing is that the process was followed elsewise.
Yeah, I mean,
The
worst part of this is it leaves the question open.
Yeah. We shouldn't have that question open. We should know.
No, it absolutely requires an answer. And here we are.
And again, I don't want to say that I think that we could prove any evidence of fraud, but there were a lot of anomalies.
Yeah.
There's a lot of laws that were skirted. At the very least, they were skirted, if not actually broken.
Certainly. And it'll be interesting to see how the Arizona case turns out that's actually going up now.
Like, I bring this shit up so like, my cousin and I will debate.
What's going on with the Arizona case?
We'll just have to see.
I thought all the election cases were dead. So.
No, they're not done.
No.
Really?
Yeah. They're still happening. That's what I was saying before.
There are still some that are going, yeah. And the Arizona thing, they're actually doing a full investigation. So I honestly think we might not be able to comment on that, depending on how it goes.
Well, here's the thing: is I don't
until
know
the
if
main
that's
media
get anywhere because they've like destroyed ballots and shit.
Also, that
and the evidence is gone. All you really have the ability to do is charge whoever destroyed the evidence.
Well, I guess we'll just.
How many ballots did they destroy?
It actually wasn't that significant a number. It was in the thousands, right? I think it was like 2,700 or more.
I actually don't know in Arizona.
It was Maricopa County.
That was the one that was under suspicion.
Yes,
so
indeed
they fucking destroyed ballots in Maricopa County.
Really?
Yeah.
Did they ever explain why they did that?
Largely because fuck Republicans, I think. This is post everything else, and this is recently that the fact that they destroyed ballots came out, and this is well past the elections.
And never mind, they have to keep these things for like 720 days or some nonsense like that.
They're supposed to keep it for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Basically.
So there are some real issues that will see some questions answered, and probably more questions raised that will not receive answers, and we'll all be in this electricity is in the air and the taste of blood is in our mouths, and we won't really be able to do anything. So we'll see. Because that's our answerless world of today. And boy, isn't that the perfect way to cut it at the end. So have fun, everybody. We'll talk to you again soon.